to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. Housekeeping as normal. I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and advise anybody who does join in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted, and it is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So that takes us to item 1 of the agenda, which is apologies. Do members have any apologies? Just a note.
Kathy will be zooming in.
Okay, so Kathy's joining online.
David's coming.
And David is joining. So
I have an apology from Cara.
Cara's on the beach.
An apology from Cara. That's grand. Okay, item 2 on the agenda, Chairperson's business. So first item there is, I think we should be passing on our thanks and best wishes to committee member Peter Martin, who has been elevated to greater things as chair of the Committee for Infrastructure. So I'd just like to put on my record
We'll give him a round of applause.
I think we give Peter a round of applause there, yeah.
It's a half-hearted round of applause.
I've heard more enthusiastic rounds of applause than that. But no, Peter, genuinely thank you for your work on committee. You'll be missed, and we wish you all the best in your new role. So the next item I just wanted to highlight, just a little bit of housekeeping. Week 1, first session back, I just want to sort of bring in just a couple of housekeeping things in terms of how we conduct the meetings, just to make sure we're all on the same page. First of all, timings. Even on two briefings, where we are in a scenario where pretty much everyone's pushing their timings as far as they go, and I understand that, but I think if we want to get through business in a way that actually ensures that we're hearing the evidence in a coherent way and that we all have the capacity to hear the evidence, I think I would be asking members to work with me on timings. If members are pressing to come in outside of their allocated question slot, I'm going to bear that in mind in the timings that they're then given to them, because that is a bit of an emerging pattern. It's fine to come in with a comment in advance of your allocated question, but I'm going to be starting to take that into account for members' allocated time, because it does tend to then take the conversation off in different directions. And I would also just be clear, when we have items, as we do today, that are higher up the agenda that may require some discussion, that are not formal briefings, I would ask members to be really conscious of time at that stage and just to keep your comments focused, clear, quick and to the point. So if there's issues that need disposed of and decisions made, we don't eat into our substantive meeting time with some of the earlier business in the agenda. So I just ask members to work with me on that. I have no interest in just spending a meeting notifying everybody of time. I don't think anybody wants to listen to that, so I do need members to work with me. Need to stick to 5 minutes, and I can't emphasise the impact of preambles on that, so I will be bringing members' attention if the preambles are excessive to come to a question. Hope I will do that fairly with all members. I have no interest in shutting down anybody's ability to ask questions, but you can't on the one hand say our meetings are far too long, and then on the other eat up into the time of the meetings regularly. So we all need to work together in that. And then finally, just on indications, I'm conscious that there's a mad scramble of indications, and it's sometimes difficult to track that. So I'm just going to ask, and I haven't actually said this to the clerk, but I think once I've brought the deputy chair in, if I could just ask for indications through the clerk, because I am just conscious that it's your eye goes to one side of the room and there's probably a concern around balance there. So I'm just going to ask to just take that through the clerk, and then that takes that pressure off me in that aspect of the rule. So if we're all okay on that, I will move on then to the only other item I wanted to raise.
Can I just clarify, in terms of preamble and so on, that there will be you will, in terms of your 5 minutes that you're allowed, be allowed to contextualise, and there are times I think it is appropriate as part of political discussion that you lay out your position before coming to a question, so long as that's within your allocated time.
I'm not saying no preambles. How you use your time is entirely up to you. That's it. But it's just to be clear, I'm conscious members will do a long preamble and then still maybe have 3 questions they want to ask, yes, and that may simply not be possible. So it's just to be clear on that. Okay, so the only other item on Chairperson's business is just around the consideration stage for the school uniforms bill that we completed earlier in the week. So We were in a scenario where there was a really quite a relatively small number of committee amendments were selected and therefore debated, and I'm conscious members may want to have a discussion on this. As it was a fairly unusual situation that we found ourselves in. Now, I want to emphasise, I think this should be a brief discussion, and I also think there needs to be a consideration around whether that's a discussion held in open or closed session. So could I just ask the clerk maybe to speak to what we might need to think about in terms of going into open and closed session on this particular issue if we are discussing potentially anything that may cross over around the role of the Speaker? Could I ask you just to speak to that?
So really members will want to talk about their committee stage and the content of the committee stage amendments, and really whether whether there's anything that the committee might be thinking of doing in respect of those items that weren't debated at consideration stage. But I mean, members can advise me what their appetite is around that. And I can then advise you on the procedures that are open to us. But obviously, anything about the Speaker's decision making is not for discussion. I'm not privy to the considerations that went on there, and that's as it should be. So, separate processes.
Well, unless anyone has any major concerns, content we have a conversation in open session around those parameters, just being very conscious of the Speaker's role and the need to respect that. I suppose, I mean, I just want to get a sense from members, is there anything further they want to do? I mean, and really the only bit of advice that I have received so far is that there is capacity to resubmit the amendments, should we wish to do that. So, happy to have a conversation on that. I'll put my view out at this stage. I think it is unlikely to result in a different scenario of the amendments being debated. I think that I can assume that the Speaker's decision will be the same, but it has been brought to my attention by officials within the Assembly that it's important that procedurally I was made aware as Chair that is an option that is available to us should we wish to do so. It's not one that I'm recommending, as I don't think it will change the outcome, and I think we are in a scenario now really where we need to continue our engagement with the bill as it now is amended, and I think actually there has been the bill has now been circulated post consideration stage.
The bill has been merged, and so the bill is amended is ready for you to look at. We've got in the pack the annotated marshal list and the minute of decision making from the other day, but I'm sure you remember the decisions that were made on Monday.
So that's really all I want to say in relation to this. I'm happy to open it up to members, but I would just emphasise members to note some of the caveats there that the clerk set out at the outset. Does anyone want to come in? Deputy Chair, do you want to come in?
I'm not going to get into the Speaker's decision-making process at all, except to say, I mean, we put a lot of work into the amendments and we're disappointed they weren't accepted. And I think we should look at options. And the option that you have outlined, Nick, isn't the only one, as far as I'm aware. But there were other issues that arose during the course of the debate the other day. And the Minister was adamant during the debate that we were never going to be shown guidelines, because the guidelines were always going to follow the legislation. Now, that's in complete contrast to what we were being told by officials on numerous occasions while they were in this committee, and on other occasions when we had private meetings with them. On one occasion, they told us in a private party meeting that once we saw the guidelines, we would realise there was no need for amendments. So, my instinct at the outset of all of this was not to trust the Minister to give him the power to make the guidelines, because I was never convinced that he was serious about introducing robust measures that would bring about affordability in terms of school uniforms. And that distrust, was confirmed to me in the course of that debate the other day. And I also had a look back at Hansard when the Minister was the chair of the Justice Committee, when the Justice Bill was progressing through the Assembly, and Naomi Long was a Justice Minister. And she wanted the power to make guidelines, and Paul Gibbon said to her, if you have nothing to hide, if you have no secrets, put it on the face of the bill. So, we were led up the garden path, and it's as stark as that. We had officials in here giving us a load of bull, basically. And I'm not suggesting they did that off their own bat. I have no doubt they were told to do that. And it's disrespectful to the committee. It's disrespectful to all the members on the committee. And it's disrespectful to the whole Assembly. Because we were working here on a false premise that guidelines were coming. And according to the Minister, they were never coming. So, and of course, he then went into that other spiel about this is an executive bill.
I'm conscious of time, Deputy Chair, and I appreciate. I mean, the frustrations I think around the time that the committee spent on this, that then really didn't come to fruition, is strongly felt. Is there? Do you have a specific proposal, or do you want to hear from other members first, Deputy Chair?
I'd like to hear from other members.
Okay. I'll bring in any other members who want to speak to this in terms of anything that we feel you want to raise, highlight. Anybody, any views? Peter, if you want.
Chair, thank you, and I listened carefully what the Deputy Chair said, and I'll pick up just on one comment. I mean, he obviously reflected what Paul had said when he was Chair of Justice to the then Justice Minister. I think I wrote it down as, put it in the face of the bill. I think any drafter, and in fact, Stephen, when he was here, and if you talk to any drafters or any people who actually write the primary legislation, they will say you don't have to put everything on the face of the bill. In fact, it's in many ways it's bad practice to put everything on the face of the bill. There's a reason that we have regulations and guidelines. The simplest example that I could give of that would be putting a monetary value, perhaps even putting a number of items on primary legislation, which I know the committee has considered and we've taken different views on. The committee, if that amendment went through...
To be clear, there's never been a suggestion of a monetary value of a cap being put in the face of the bill. It's the requirement to make a cap. Is
yeah,
the
but
that is important for...
That's fine. It certainly has been talked about, and monetary values have been talked about at the committee. But I accept that, and you corrected me on that. Is my view that those are mistakes. Doing that is a mistake, and I've outlined my reasons for that in committee. Because primary legislation in many ways cannot be changed. It's there and it can be there for all eternity. Whereas, guidelines, regs that follow can be, and they can be adjusted. So in the guidelines, as the Chair mentioned there, at some point those guidelines might have a monetary figure on them. They might have a number of items. But if they decide to go with a monetary figure, that can be changed. In light of inflation running at 3%, 4%, that can be uplifted year on year. And raised so that the figure itself stays relevant to the cost of the items. So just picking up that point, and I've said this numerous times. I don't think the argument the Deputy Chair made, certainly in terms of the quote he used from Justice, is not comparable. It's apples and oranges, and I don't think everything should necessarily. Maybe the current Education Minister was perhaps wrong when he was Justice Minister in terms of what he said, but I don't know the context of all that. But just to make that point, I think that's what the guidelines are there for.
I don't want to rehearse all of this for too long, just because we've two really big briefings ahead of us, and another item on matters arising that could take a fair bit of time. Does anybody else have anything they particularly want to add? Danny, I'll bring you in, and then it's just to see if there is anything in particular anybody is proposing that we do, and then we will take that from there.
I suppose just to put on the record, how disappointed I was, and it comes to the work that a committee does. Almost what is the point of the committee and the evidence we take, and I'm going to speak on the voice of young people, exactly what the young people were saying. I believe the hard work and working with the clerks, that we were within the scope of the bill, and the fact that it hasn't appeared, it does weigh our questions here that we don't have the answers for, or we can't get. It's just really frustrating. It's disappointing, and I feel for everyone who worked on it. That's everybody across thing and the staff in behind. It's just really disappointing, and it's a missed opportunity.
Thank you.
And unprecedented.
That's the right word there, unprecedented.
I mean, the Bill Office hasn't been able to identify any other case of a committee amendment not being selected for debate since 2011. But time didn't permit asking the Minister for amendments. You know, in a committee stage, often that's how the amendments would be drafted by the people who drafted the bill. And our process was obviously very short. So the Bill Office drafts clear and precise amendments on the, you know, according to the instructions that they've been given, and they seek to avoid unintended consequences. And in this case, that gave effect to the role of the committee in making legislation.
Okay, thank you for that. So I suppose it's really is other than airing some different views on how the process landed. I'm just checking if there is a sort of formal action arising. I mean, my feeling is that, as frustrating as the process we've been engaged in has been, and I absolutely do take the Deputy Chair's point around the lack of guidelines. That has been just the theme through the whole process, and I think if we had had early sight of them, we may have been involved in a very different process. But all that said, I'm not making any proposal here, but if there is one, happy to hear it. Otherwise, we can note those comments for the record.
And the other point, just on the guidelines, if we had been told we weren't getting sight of guidelines, we might have had a different response to the Minister's request to shorten the committee stage.
Absolutely. Okay.
And I'll just make this final short
and then
point.
it would be the final point, Deputy Chair.
Any trust that might have been there with this Minister, as far as we're concerned, is absolutely gone completely.
All noted. I don't think any actions arising, but all noted. I think sometimes it's maybe good to air these things. There was maybe some pent up frustration in the chamber there, which I felt was maybe this was an appropriate opportunity to air that. Okay, item 3 on the agenda: declarations of interest. Members have any declarations they need to make for any items on the agenda today? No. If anything arises, as normal, please do bring that to either mine or the clerk's attention. Item 4, matters arising. So there's a couple of bits here, and again, I do apologise. There is a fair little bit here at the top of the agenda. We have correspondence from Justin McCampbell from NASUWT, who presented last week at page 7, providing clarification of comments he made at the last committee meeting. And Mr. McCampbell states, because there was some discussion of this at the end of that evidence session, that when he made reference to the Minister being reckless, he was referring to Minister Gibbon in the context of his withdrawal of guidance to schools. And I thought it was important that we did note Mr. McCampbell's comments, as I know John had sought specific clarity on that, and I think it's good to have that on the record. Don't plan
and indeed, Chair, some of the media reported it as Ms Long's comments.
Yes,
so,
which I think it was subsequently corrected.
Yeah,
it was subsequently corrected, but I think it's important for as it did receive discussion as who was he referring to, important to get that clarified. Item 4.2, so this was an item carried over from last week because time beat us, and I thought it was important to have this at the top of the agenda so we didn't find ourselves in the same position again. I'd refer members to correspondence that the committee has received alleging some financial irregularities and governance issues at an individual school. We deferred it to this week's meeting. Now there will undoubtedly need to be a discussion around whether or not it's appropriate to take this item in open or closed session, so I'm going to ask the clerk to speak to that, really what members need to be thinking about in that space, and then we'll make a decision on that and go from there.
So essentially, the committee has tried before to have discussion about anything to do with allegations in an individual school in closed session, and in respect of this one, I am aware that some of the material has been discussed in the public domain and in the media, but there are alleged conflicts of interest about named individuals in the papers that have been submitted to members, and without enough information, the committee wouldn't want to be speculating about those. So really, those are the reasons that you might not speak about it in public, but that's your decision.
So from my perspective, and this will be a decision for the committee to take, I am in this instance comfortable to take this in open session, given that the school in question has been named publicly, and do you want to come in? Is it around declaration of interest? I'll take
Just
that
wanted to
now.
declare an interest because my daughter attends the school.
Okay, that's fine. So that's noted. The school in question has been it has been reported in the public domain. So I am broadly comfortable that we can have a high level discussion on this, but I want to be really clear. I completely concur with the clerk. There should be no naming of any individuals if we do have this in open session. There should be no references to any reports that have not been made available in the public domain, or speculation about what may or may not be in those reports, or speculations around conflicts of interest. So this really will be to simply note the issue and make a decision on whether there is any correspondence or action that the committee wants to take. Now, the material has come through Peter directly. It was brought to committee. So I'm content to ask Peter to speak to it, and I emphasise briefly, unless there are alternative feelings around the open and closed session. So I'm just going to check, are there any indications around a differing view on taking this at open session? Nope. Peter, I'm going to ask very, very, very brief comment. You'd provided the papers, and then we will move straight to a decision on whether the committee wants to do anything with the material. And I cannot emphasise strongly enough the caveats I've placed.
I'm not going to fall out with you on my last
we
day.
will
Here,
move
Chair,
quickly
are you
into
joking
closed
me?
session should anybody overstep any of those
Are you
lines.
kidding? So thanks very much, Chair. Look, I'll get right into it. I don't plan to talk about anything that's marked restricted in terms of the document. I don't tend to talk about any individuals, and I will keep my comments in the public domain. All right. So look, I've been brought into this about a year ago by some stakeholders who were concerned about this issue. So I have known about it for over a year now. This all came to light with an audit report by EF at Cambridge, public domain in 2024 last year. It's an audit firm. Subsequently, Education Authority went in, did an audit, and that audit was reviewed. So you had audit 1 in maybe January, and it was reviewed to audit 3 in about March. But there are outstanding issues as members, and I'm not going to refer to anything inside this, but as members can read what is restricted in front of us that came in from a parent who's quite happy for that lady's name to be in the public domain, but I'm not going to mention it. There are a whole range of issues that are ongoing on this school. I'm going to pick up on a couple. One is that at the end of last term, 60 members of staff at Assumption Grammar called for an independent review of the school's governance structures and said, again, public domain, that morale, I'm just going to quote it, was at an all-time low. And the reason for that was a poor and dismissive response from the Board of Governors. Since then, a parents group was formed. For transparency, I was at a parents meeting, I think it was over the summer at some point. There's 150 parents, which whenever you take out the cohort of year 1 who haven't experienced all this, that's quite a sizable chunk of the school population who are unhappy about how the school is being governed. And again, they have cited their experience, and there's been communication, as I've been cited on, back and forward, that they feel the Board of Governors is being very dismissive of their concerns.
And so to be clear, obviously the board has no right of reply in this space here, so it's really just to be clear. I think probably I wouldn't want to hear too much more in terms of the detail. Do you have a proposal, Peter, in terms of an action that you would like to see arising from this for the committee to consider?
Yeah, well, I do, Chair. So my proposal to committee, already on my last day, is that the material that we have in front of us, which was sent in, and clearly this represents a large cohort of Assumption Grammar School in terms of the parents, certainly a substantial cohort. They have raised a number of issues, and they've come to this committee because they feel they've got nowhere else to go. They have written to the Minister. The Minister has, I think they're made in correspondence. They've written to EA. They're coming to this committee because they want this to be known, and they want their concerns to be known. So my recommendation, or my proposal to committee, is that the document we have, the questions are stripped out of it. I'm sure the person who wrote this would be more content for the whole thing to be sent. But certainly the questions are at least stripped out, and we send it to the department, the Education Authority, and the board of Assumption Grammar School for a response. And that would be my proposal.
So I, certainly from my perspective, and I'll allow other members to come in, couple of things. I would be content for correspondence to go to the EA and the department. I would be less content in terms of the correspondence going to the school for a response. The committee has always been really clear that we do not have a function as a complaints handler for individual schools, and I would worry that you would be making a very clear exception in this case that we have not made in any others on that regard. So that would be my one point of difference in what you've proposed. So content to write to the department and EA. I don't consider that there's a need to restrict the document that goes to them, because I imagine that they're well aware of all the information in it. I think that the volume of correspondence that has been generated from parents in this is clear that there is significant discontent, and I think it's appropriate for us to seek a response. But unless other members have another view, and we can obviously consider that, I wouldn't propose.
Just on that point, Chair, apologies John, apologies Kathy. Chair, you mentioned that obviously the board don't have a right to reply in this context. We would give them a right to reply. That would be our right. That would be their right to reply if we copied a core to them and asked them. So
that's for the committee to decide.
I understand that, Chair.
My concern is that once we get into back and forth, you're into some sort of proxy complaints handling rule, which I don't think anybody here wants to start receiving every internal complaint relating to a school in Northern Ireland for the committee to arbitrate on. So that would be my view. Kathy, you'd want it to come in.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose from the outset, what I want to say is this clearly is a very serious ongoing issue, and a lot of us have been contacted around it, in our own individual capacities as well. I agree with yourself, Chair. We have had instances before where there has been complaints about individual schools that have come in, and we've decided that we aren't taking that role. I would fear that we would open a can of worms in that case, and we would in effect become mediators, which is not what our role is here. However, given this case, given the seriousness of it, I would wholeheartedly agree that we could send this to the department and the EA, because ultimately, there has to be some responsibility taken here from the department and the EA in this also, as my view is that there's a much wider issue at play here in terms of voluntary contributions and transparency and the management of that, and that comes from a lack of guidance from the department on that matter. And we've discussed this as a committee on numerous occasions before when we've had witnesses in. So yes, I agree with the proposal that Peter's making, but I don't agree that we send it to the school, and that's purely so that we are not setting a precedence here.
Right. Gonna hopefully no other indications, because there's another chunky item coming straight after this. So just very briefly, David, just to come in.
Getting a sense of feeling where the committee's going, all I would say is this matter is in the public sphere now. It's been discussed here, may well be picked up by the press later, having been discussed here. While we may not be sending anything to the school, I would think that any Board of Governors or school leadership should be concerned to be hearing their school talked about in this way with such serious concerns. And I think silence from the school or not addressing the concerns will be read in a particular way. People will not assume that there is nothing to be seen here, and actually a responsible school would want to address those concerns. And I think it's just to note that, and I think a lot of people will view it in that way.
David, absolutely take your point. My view remains that is a matter for the school, and I think you may find, depending on which school it happened to be and where it was located in the country, members would take a different view as to how we might want to approach it. So I think in the interest of fairness, that to me it seems appropriate. We have never sought a response to a complaint from an individual school in the past, and I think you would be setting a precedent that we would struggle to navigate in future should this arise.
The only thing I would come back on, Chair, is that I can honestly say,
quick point.
well, no, it's only because you framed it a particular way, and I'm sure you didn't mean it in that way, but there could be an inference there that this is being raised because a school is of one sector or one. That is nothing. This is about parents coming in.
To be completely clear, I think members represent different constituencies, as in
I understand. I just wanted to be clear on that.
This school is in my constituency. Yes. I had no interest in putting this into closed session. I think parental concerns are absolutely valid, but I do think in the interest of fairness to all schools that we would be very clear we're not getting into that role of complaints handling, and I think that is entirely appropriate.
Presumably, Chair, we could write to the school and tell them, though, that we're sending the material on to the EA and department.
I think through the clerk, if that's considered to be an appropriate intervention, I can't see any objection with that.
At least to get something from us to say, we've received something, here's the action we're taking, and just tidies it up.
Draw a line. Do we have a committee decision? Not an agreement, Peter. I mean, it's whether you would choose to divide the committee.
I'm not going to force it to a vote on my last day, Chair. I would simply reflect that there's a serious cohort of parents who've come to this committee. VGS schools, the boards are those responsible, and if the board are stonewalling them and they've come to this committee, I do think and I don't want to set a precedent. I don't mind setting a precedent because this is my last day in the committee. But for the sake of the future work, I get the point around precedents. But equally, where else can these parents go to? They've come to the committee. They just want answers. They want a bit of transparency. They are not getting it from the board. And just to be clear, the stuff I read today is nothing compared to the stuff that I've cited on that I cannot talk about in this committee, even with the cover, the legal cover we have. My concerns run way deeper than the stuff I've raised today. This is only stuff in the public domain. So I'm not going to force it to a vote, but I want to be clear. My view is that we should at least give the Board of Governors the right to reply and copy it in, but I'm not going to force it to a vote.
No objection to being copied in, but I don't think we should be directly requesting a response. I'm going to bring Cathy in. I'm going to ask one comment and then we close.
Sorry, Chair. I just want to clarify that I don't think, not to speak for you, but I don't think, and I certainly wasn't suggesting that we don't need a reply for the Board of Governors, that they shouldn't be coming back on this, because like I had said, this is extremely serious. However, I believe that it's the role of the EA and the department to seek that response from the Board of Governors, and they should be doing that, and they should be going out of their way to make sure that they get that reply. Okay. It's just the precedence that this would set if we step in as mediators. So I do agree with you, Peter, in that sense, but it's just the role that we play in that.
Okay, so I think we've arrived at a position. We'll move on to the next item if all are agreed. I appreciate, Peter, you've noted your concerns, and David as well.
What did we agree?
Okay. You move on to the next item, but not on this.
That's fine. Okay.
What did we agree, Chair, just for clarity?
We'll be sharing the correspondence with the EA and the department and asking for a response to the concerns highlighted. I think there was an agreement that we copy the board in so they are aware that that has been done. Not into the restricted correspondence, but to advise them that we have made contact in relation to parental concerns.
That we've taken.
Let's just check, is it just the questions that are asked, or is it the whole...
I think the questions being asked seems appropriate because the document is marked restricted for our attention. I think we should, be clear that we're going to respect that. So,
okay. Thank you.
Michelle, you wanted to come in?
Hope it's the right juncture. I won't be here for AOB, so hope this is okay. I had contact about the press story on the minister's trip to Florida from some parents who were concerned about it and would like to get something expressly written back to the committee to explain the value for money aspect of that. There was a lot of hurt around it. So if the committee were agreed that we could write to the department to get a fuller understanding of the benefit of that trip, especially in the context of the SEND crisis at the time. I say the contact I've had is expressing that concern and that pain. I just thought it was worth raising today.
Have you had written correspondence that you want to share with the committee on that, or?
It was more text from a parent. I wouldn't want to.
Okay. So ordinarily, probably AOB would be the place I would expect that to be raised. Could I ask? I think just so that, given the interest of time, so that we can have a proper discussion on this, Michelle, because I think that the issues around that trip and the value for money are really important, and they are in the public interest. Is that something you would be prepared to write through to the clerk to make a formal request around what you're seeking, and then I think we can have a discussion in the round, possibly when we don't have such a packed agenda at this stage. But I completely agree that the issues around that trip, I think parents do have some questions that may need answered. So that's appreciated. Thank you. Still on matters arising, item 4.3, there is a written ministerial statement that has been tabled on the review on the future of qualifications. It's too detailed a statement, I think, to get into now, so I'll just ask members to note it. Item 5 is draft minutes, and I would refer members to the draft minutes of the Education Committee meetings of the 8th of September and 10th of September at page 23 of tabled papers. Can I get members' agreement that those are complete and accurate record of proceedings? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Can be a bit nippy.
Okay, still working through the top of the agenda, item 6, terms of reference of the SEN inquiry. So I would refer members to the draft terms of reference for a strategic review of current SEN provision and transformation agenda at page 26. Following our meeting on the 8th of September, the clerk wrote to members seeking reviews about the terms of reference for the committee's inquiry. So I can ask the clerk to speak to that in a moment. I'm just going to set out my view at this stage. So I'm content with the terms, but I would want to really emphasise a few things in terms of absolute clarity, and I think I would like to see, just in terms of what we are approaching and putting out in our call for evidence, that we have absolute clarity on what we are seeking from any stakeholder seeking to give evidence, and from our statutory stakeholders. So I agree that getting that benchmark on progress against the PAC recommendations is worthwhile, but ultimately not the overarching purpose of our inquiry. For me, I think that we need to be really clear that by the end of this inquiry, we are reporting on our understanding of the current operational responsibilities, budget and challenges that the EA face, and that should be aligned along the right support, right people, place and time strands. And I think we should have real clarity when we're asking the EA to come in and brief of what we want to hear. I think we need to understand what are their operational responsibilities, do they have the resource they need to deliver them, and what are the other system challenges making those areas of operation difficult in terms of delivery. I would also like to hear from the EA along those 4 strands on the transformation agenda. In their assessment, will that deliver what they need to improve the SEN system? And then I believe we should hear from stakeholders to bring their perspectives to those 4 strands, and then the DE on those 4 strands individually. And I can't emphasise that clearly enough. I mean, there has been of no value hearing from the DE on the overarching agenda, because it is too high level, and I think every time we have left none the wiser even what year of the plan we're in, let alone what the plan's going to do. And for me, the report will then need to highlight what are the critical issues in the system that require resolution, and does the plan deliver on that, and we can have recommendations flowing from that. And I would just want to be really clear that when our call for evidence comes out, there is no ambiguity around what we're looking for. So I would be wanting to get members' agreement that is, we are on the same page, and I would want to suggest that as an action arising from that, something we've really struggled to get, and it might be useful in advance of next week's briefing, can we get the benchmark budget figures here? So from the EA, what is your budget, any budget lines that relate to SEN, can they clarify what they are and break those down into exactly what areas of spend and what that operationally is going into? And similarly from the department, I'm increasingly concerned that we are operating in this high level 587 million, is it, Peter, figure? Or
570.
570, keep me right in these things. I don't know what I'm going to do without you.
Next week.
Yeah. I'm going to lose my numbers, man. But I think that is really important that we get a breakdown that goes beyond that, because how can the committee make an assessment of what we think in tightly constrained resources are the right actions from the department if we don't know how much any of it costs, or how much of it is actually live, how much of it is happening? I think it's an untenable position to be placed in terms of scrutiny. So I would suggest we seek those benchmark figures, so we have a clear understanding of our starting point. Can I just ask, are we in agreement on that, or is there anything there that requires further clarity? To bring the Deputy Chair in, and then Michelle.
The only thing I would add is that there should be some contextualisation of how we get into this problem. And I mean, we knew the numbers were rising. The DUP had the ministry. They were warned that they needed to prioritise spending on children with SEN. They didn't prioritise that spending. They didn't prepare for building of new special schools and so forth. And now the minister is trying to reframe this as an executive-wide problem. And while, the executive should, be looking at what's going on here, the problem has arisen because of, the negligence of the DUP over the last 10 years or so. So, I mean, I think the problem has to be framed within that context.
I think clearly we're probably going to struggle in terms of the political framing of that, and that's obviously the Deputy Chair's prerogative to set it out in those terms. On the principle of, and I will bring members in to get to the sort of agreeing terms of reference. to maybe just draw out the Deputy Chair's point around maybe some sense of how we got here, and I'll leave it for other members to address the politics of that in a moment. It really is just, I do think that that's why the PAC bit is worthwhile, to get a sense of, we knew at this stage what was required and where have the departments got to on that. I mean, are you content that would be the right forum to have that discussion over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Okay. David, I think you'd indicated, and then John.
Yeah, it sounds as if the
Michelle was first, and then she gave a right reply on Pat's
David
point.
got very triggered by the Deputy Chair and was keen to get in. Michelle, I'll bring you.
I will be unusual for David.
So we've been through an inquiry already, so learning from that, a couple of things. One, it would be helpful, I think, for the Kings we're asking the department to bring to us, that we keep a note of those.
Yes.
So even if it's in the committee, we have our own separate file for the inquiry, that we're clear what we're asking, so we have clear sight of what's coming back and that it's the right material. Also, just to reiterate your point that there are 4 pillars here that we're looking to interrogate, and each one of them in detail. Again, I know I've suggested this before, maybe it wasn't appropriate for committee papers, but for an inquiry, even if we had a pro forma that said we are coming to ask you to give us information and a written briefing on the pillar of right place. And not to drift off into work. Sometimes I feel we get the information that I want to share rather than the information that we've asked for. So we want to be really clear and use this inquiry well. And the resources piece attached to it should be really clear as well. And we shouldn't have to go hooking around and looking forward and making up figures and hoping that we're right. It should be crystal clear so we can interrogate that information.
Yeah, I think that point, and you have raised this before, around making sure that what we're asking witnesses to bring is clear and unambiguous. I mean, I think we even see today, we saw the placements briefing from EA, but it's actually a wide-ranging SEN update. It's not actually just about placements, and I think that encourages everybody to ask about different things, and we miss the opportunity to really get into the detail of that particular issue. So I think if there was scope, and I don't know whether that's possible, for some sort of tracker for the inquiry in terms of what correspondence has gone out, and a clear pro forma so that witnesses are in no doubt about what we're actually seeking evidence on. So I'm very happy to endorse that. David, I will bring you in now for your right of reply and response, and then John follows, and then I would hope and Danny to follow. And if I could ask everyone brief comments, because this is an unusually top-heavy agenda here. We're working through.
Chair, I think my colleague's going to speak to the terms of reference. I think just in response to I think we're all looking forward to getting our teeth into this because it's such an important issue. I think we've heard the Deputy Chair speak, and it sounds like he's preempting or has certainly decided already what he wants some aspect of the report to say before we've even got to the witnesses. But I think it is fair to say there's been recognition around this table at different times that quite often the data wasn't there, it wasn't coming from health. The issues with SEN and how we've ended up in this position are cross-cutting, and the idea that it can all be laid at the doors of education ministers who weren't in possession of the data because it hadn't been collected, I think that it's worth putting that on record. So this is a political committee, and I'm aware of that, and we talked about preambles earlier on. I think there's a place for politics around this committee, but I think we should at least wait until we get into the substance of the issue before we start writing the report.
Well, thank you for that, David. John, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. I've heard the discussion of we knew there was a rise in the number of children with special education needs. Surely if we're doing a deep dive into this issue, we need to understand why there is a rise. Do we operate on the assumption that there's simply been underdiagnosis for years and that now it's just simply accurate diagnosis?
Yep.
Or is there other reasons why we have a spike? Are there things that contribute towards children having special education needs, which are environmental, lifestyle, diet? And that isn't a criticism, by the way. I have family members who have, you can, if we actually need to roll up our sleeves, not worry about the short-term optics of things, I think we need to be seeking views on what is behind the rise. Okay, accepting that there's been underdiagnosis in the past, but are there factors that cause a rise? And then asking for a piece of analysis on where the biggest rises are across Northern Ireland. Are there areas that have a spike and are disproportionate to other areas? And then try and delve into this and find out, well, why is it that I'll make up North Bedfordshire has X, South Bedfordshire has Y? And try and understand the deep dive into the data, because unless you really understand a problem, I don't think you can start to address it. And we can just watch these numbers rise, but why are they rising? Where's the issues?
If I could just respond to that, and
It's sensitive because I'm not suggesting anyone who's a child who's saying because their family is caused by any negligence or any of that, just to put that on the record. I think, but if there was a rise in some other health issue, physical, you'd be saying, is there something here we need to be aware of? And that's just the point I'm making with honesty, but I think it's an important point.
I know Peter had raised this issue previously before, so I have had a discussion with the clerk around the research capacity, and the sense coming back from Raise is that is simply a piece of work that is too big, too cross-cutting really, that for this committee's resource to deal with. I'm also not convinced that if we are trying to have a short, sharp look at actually the operational realities and the department's plans for transformation, that some of that higher level background is the best use of the committee's time, would be my sense. Very happy to hear other members' views, and we do need to get the terms of reference nailed down. So absolutely note the points, and other members can speak to it as well. That's my view.
It wouldn't take much to get a geographical spread, a map of Northern Ireland, and see where the bar charts are.
I mean, I would believe though that's probably data the EA has, because in terms of their planning, we need to have that information.
To see
so
that,
so I'm sure we can raise that with the EA when they're here today.
There's disproportionalities trends.
Can I suggest
Briefly, then Peter, then Danny, and we do need to.
Can I suggest if we can't include it within the scope of the terms of reference so on, that we look at maybe doing a concurrent meeting with the health committee around specifically that issue, and we look at that issue so there is at least some understanding where there's bound to be experts that we can bring in to speak to and get a little learning on that.
I would suggest we may want to leave that with the clerk to come back with maybe if she could engage with her counterpart on health on that. I'm not sure that we're going to find a piece of research that aligns in a position that we'll all coalesce around, because I think it's contested territory, and I'm just not sure in terms of we're trying to deal with the realities of our education system. I'm not sure.
And we're always
getting into
the horse is always bolting, and we're always chasing where the horse is running, instead of actually saying, look, what is going on here? Because if we were dealing with a health issue, and if we're actually going to be real about issues, cognitive well-being and things, we should see it and not stigmatise it as being like a physical issue too. If there was a rise in some physical illnesses, we'd be saying, why is that area going to rise? Why is there a 300% rise?
Can I make a suggestion?
What's behind this?
We have the autism reviewer in today, and I know that she will be keen to speak to these issues as well. That might be a starting point maybe to begin with in terms of her role, and that she may well have issues, aspects of this she wants to speak to. We'll make an agreement around terms of reference today. I do just fear that if we get into very, very substantive pieces of research, we will bite off more than we can chew and miss the opportunity to deal with the sort of urgent realities of the challenges within the system now. But that other members can speak to that. So Peter and Danny, briefly.
Okay, so I'll make a quick comment just about the first bullet point, which is to contrast current SEND delivery against criticisms of service, which sounds negative, I guess, to me. I think a better... I don't know what that is. Is it a bullet point? Is it a mission statement? Doesn't actually say there, but I've just written down here to analyse and evaluate current SEND delivery in Northern Ireland. If you want to put the end of that against targets, that's fine.
Comfortable with that? I think I set out that that's really what we need to be looking at.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I'd be happy to pare back all of the
I think the framing there is unfortunate. Look, I'll pick up on what the Deputy Chair said in terms of context, and I'm going to continue on from where John left off. I just don't think, and I appreciate Deputy Chair's making a political point and a little bit of political point scoring there, and that's fine.
Point.
I think if we're going to look at history the history of why we got here to try and blame someone, I just think we're way better looking at the future and what the solution to this is, rather than retrospectively looking back. If we're going to look back, we should be looking back at what are the reasons for this rise. And I think there is a piece of research here, Chair, and I'd agree with John, whether this is just high-level stuff that looks at what is the level of increase in SEN in Finland. I know that the Deputy Chair loves Finland, but what's the rise in Finland? What's the rise in Germany? What's the rise in the Republic? And is this something that countries worldwide are... And I suspect I know the answer to this, but I think that would not be... I could do that in a morning myself, so I don't think it's going to be too much to ask Reyes to do it, and see where other countries are. It's exploding in America, and in a lot of times they medicate kids, and that is not the answer. But we know that. That's all there in the public domain. So I think something high level that looks at what the actual rises are globally across some comparative countries would be useful. If it's short.
Of time, can I come in there?
Okay.
I have no issue with a comparative look at rises and numbers, and if that helps us get a sense of where we sit internationally. In terms of the whys and the wherefores, I think we are going to be taking a step into a space this committee is not equipped to really make those decisions on, and it will be taking us away from the challenges of operations. But John, I know you've made your points, Peter. I'm just so conscious. Like, I'll be the one being slated if we're sitting here past 5 o'clock. So I do need members to work with me in this. So
not to your face, Chair.
Yeah, of course.
No, I actually think that is one of the most important things, because it's absolutely key. Because other countries, I know other countries are struggling with this. And as I said, in America, they tend to medicate a lot. And that is not the solution. And it's an appalling way to deal with some of these issues. But other countries are having to deal with this as well. Other European countries are seeing a rise in SEN. And I would be really interested to look at how they're dealing with it, and just to see what best practice we can get. And actually make that a committee. If we find out some countries maybe don't have a rise, well, let's find out.
A rise or reverse the rise.
Yeah,
Sorry,
why?
Yeah.
Why is it Northern Ireland? Why is it UK? Why?
Children are born with autism.
Say again?
But we're not talking about
I don't want to get into back and forth.
I really am concerned. We're getting way off track here. But so I've John's points, Peter's points noted. Danny's wanting to come in, and then we'll make some decisions around where we go.
I suppose the point, I agree with you laid out, and Michelle covered the other part that I was actually going to bring up. I think that's laid out pretty well. I think if you get into that realm of why the raise and why it's happening, that's for experts in probably the health field. We have parents looking at us to try and see the solutions to placements, to transport, all the issues they face every single day. It isn't going away, and we're looking for those solutions in the short, the medium, the long term. A wee concern I had of yesterday, and maybe it'll come out in the evidence, like the minister said, schools are going to close. What schools? Where? Why? When? Like that a lot of the parents that I would engage with about saying, they didn't know what that meant. That means the special schools are closing, or could be closed in the morning. That sent shockwaves, and it wasn't even the message that went out yesterday that should, like, we need X amount of money. It almost sounded like, I haven't got a plan B. If I don't get this money, and this isn't a flagship from the executive, I'm engaging with nobody, and you're all just going to be left without a school. That's how that went down yesterday within the families that I engage with. And I engage with an awful lot of families right across the divide. I really do. And that's what came across yesterday. So I think we need to get really into the heart of what we want to make lives better. And I think that's the whole, what we wanted to do with this inquiry. And I think we could very quickly get sidetracked, distracted with wider discussions around the world of the rise of it. I really do.
I come back on what Danny said there, Chair.
I'm going to allow one final comment, and then we make a decision.
So look, I agree with Danny, but what Danny's saying is it's a tactical piece of work. It's looking at what we have now, and nearly the crisis that we're in, and how to move things around now. I just think the more important question is how do we move out of it strategically in the future? And if we don't know what the reasons are for that, it's like it's
not something the department that should be doing. This feels like way beyond the scope of a committee.
Well, I tell you the thing, because if someone modelled the numbers, if the rise continues as it's rising, in 10 years, what percentage of our young people are going to have SEN at school? So we need to deal with fundamental problems.
needs to work around them. It's not about us understanding why these children are going to have it and need to be supported. So no one reason.
I'm going to draw a line.
But can we see data about parts of Northern Ireland have the highest spikes?
So I'm going to draw a line under that. I think just through the clerk, just to check in terms of capacity. My understanding would be there would be research capacity to look at a geographical analysis of where the highest levels of special educational need presentation are, because I think that's reasonable in terms of helping the EA plan of where we need placements. Is there scope beyond that to do anything further in terms of an international comparator in terms of how that is?
Well, I think you're right, Chair, that the EA would probably be the first port of call, and that's where our researcher would be going. Yes. So if we have them in front of us, the committee could ask in the first instance. Also, I have asked the researcher about this because it was brought up earlier in discussion of the strategic plan. The Ipsos review of special educational needs, which was commissioned by the department in 2022, did look at relative incidence of special educational needs in Northern Ireland as compared with England, for example. So there is some research there that you can look at in the first instance, and I will ask my researcher about an international comparative exercise and whether that, how much that would entail. Maybe a literature review in the first.
Are members
instance,
content
does that
with
sound-
that?
And
suggestion?
within Northern Ireland, if we get those figures within Northern Ireland.
So we're going to ask EA first, yeah.
We'll ask EA first, and then
Yeah,
if not,
thanks.
Mark can take that away. In terms of the terms of reference, are members content broadly with what I set out at the beginning, that we perhaps refine that, just those terms of reference, so they are clear and focused? And I would really want to emphasise Michelle's point. I think a really key piece on this is that when we are inviting people to come and give evidence, they know what it is that we are looking to hear from them, not wide-ranging, huge in scope briefings. If we ask them to brief on transport, we want to hear about transport. We don't want to hear about LITs. So that, I think that to me is really important.
I think it is an important point that John has raised, that at some stage there needs to be research into why there has been this exponential rise in the number of kids with SEN. It's much too big an issue for our little inquiry to deal with. And as Sunday has suggested, we're not going to be able to do the research on it. The committee research people, it's even too big a job for them. And it's vitally important that somebody at some stage discovers why this rise has taken place. But I just don't. I think it's beyond our capabilities on this committee. Important though it absolutely is.
It's not with judgment, just so anyone's watching. It's not about judgment. It's just about.
I think we've perhaps landed in a compromised position we're all in agreement with. So can I ask, we are, as per the discussion here and the additional information the clerk will have captured there, we are agreed.
Great.
Okay. Item 7 then. We are considerably behind schedule. As I say, unusually top-heavy agenda, which is not the norm. If you want to bring the next, the first witness in. So item 7 is an oral briefing by the Autism Reviewer, Ema Cubitt, and specifically on SEN placements. Although there may be some wider issues that have been discussed that Emma may want to speak to. So while we just let Emma get seated and settled. Just to remind members that the purpose of the briefing is to avail of the reviewer's assessment of current placement arrangements for children with special educational needs, perhaps with a particular focus on autism. And I would like to just propose with members' agreement at the start that we take this as evidence for our inquiry, because placements is a key strand and we're getting the opportunity early to hear on that. So I don't think I need to do any further introductions. You've become a familiar face at committee, so it really is over to you to present, and then we will move into question and answer. And remind members again, we will stick to 5 minutes per inquiry. So Emma, over to you.
Delighted to be back. Thank you. It's quite timely, I suppose. The last time I was in front of the committee was the 2 committees at Middletown Centre for Autism. So it's nice to have been asked at the early stage. I was listening to some of the last bit just outside, and I hope I can address some of the issues that you've been talking about. So just in terms of, from what I want to put to the committee today, is if I take a stand back and see, obviously there's an awful lot's happened in the last 24 hours, and I'm looking at system-wide. So the education system, as you know, is the department, schools and the EA. And probably for the first time, I see a point where none of those, if you think of a triangle and they're each at a point, they're not connected. This is probably the first time we've got really close to that cohesion with the Minister's statement. I met with EA yesterday. I know that they're attending after this. And in terms of, there's a slight change in a more transparent acknowledgement of what they don't want to happen again, this recurrent SEN crisis. And obviously this week we've also heard across media from Dr. Graham Galt. And incidentally, he has contacted me this afternoon. And having heard the Minister yesterday, spoken with the EA, and obviously the contact I've had with Dr. Graham Galt, I think we're in a place of real opportunity. For a long time, the system didn't respond. People were shouting essentially into the void about what needed to happen. The system is starting to respond. But there's the period of time we're in now, I think, is really fragile in terms of opportunity. And between now and the end of this year is really the point where the department, the EA and schools, obviously with the support of the committee, need to really get a grasp on where they are. We have the plan. The attitude in the EA appears to be right. Schools have said, we want to do this together. And if we get beyond the end of the year where we should be, if there is that change in that period of time, then obviously we can look at resilience and sustainability of the overall system. Before yesterday's announcement from the Minister and the publication of the operational plans, I had already planned out in terms of what I thought we needed and where the risks lay for progress. I think we need high traction and low drama, and I mean political drama. We need clear focus and no distraction, and I mean that played out yesterday. Today we hear more about the use of AI than this critical issue. That's deeply disappointing. Yeah. The Minister is right. We are at a pivotal point, but I think it's fragile, and we need unity. And broadly, I think since Assembly is back, there has been unity. I mean, I think members have spoken quite clearly about what they want and want to work with the Minister. But as I said, it is fragile. There are risks. Unless each part of the system is in sync, it won't work. If there's lack of political unity, I think we'll be seeing the same thing this time next year. I think special educational needs is a non-partisan issue, and I would encourage members to look inside themselves in terms of what they know in terms of constituents, the families that they've spoken to, and not veer off and this critical time really between now and the end of the year into politics and what comes about with that. The other problem I foresee is cultural stasis, with the potential to travel backwards. The risk with that is really could be catalysed by the misinformation that's currently being generated. It's not fully here in Northern Ireland, but across in England, if you've seen broadsheets, there's some pretty unsavoury commentary, and likewise across the ocean to the US. In terms of misinformation, I just wanted to read it very briefly from an extract from Adam Harris, who is the CEO and founder of Ireland's Autism Charity. The Autism Europe Congress was held at the end of last week, which I was at, and he describes it in a newspaper article as the beating heart of the European autistic community, with nearly 2,000 delegates, autistic people, families, researchers, practitioners and advocates. And he quite rightly points out that outside these walls there is a swirl of misinformation that continues to shape how autism is understood, diagnosed and discussed in Ireland and beyond. And what I have seen and experienced, not only professionally but personally, is misinformation starts with throwaway comments round dinner tables, in workplaces. We didn't have any of that in my day. Sure, we're all a bit autistic now. Now, these informed narratives are often presented and accepted as fact. But when we think about that, what are the consequences? And you might be thinking, why is she talking about this in terms of SEN reform? I think that the real change that needs to happen is cultural, and this is potentially the biggest threat to that. Adam goes on to say in the article, these myths are not harmless misunderstandings. They fuel stigma, shame and delayed diagnosis, and indeed can pose broader public health threats to our society. They distract from the supports that autistic people truly need, and in the worst cases lead to real harm. And thinking specifically of special educational needs, I mean, there's a stark reality in his article where he talks about the damage done. It's not theoretical. They have a report from earlier in 2025 where respondents said that being autistic made it more likely for a child to be punished at school. 1 in 4 parents said they would worry if their non-autistic child shared a classroom with an autistic peer. These are not numbers, they're reminders of the barriers and bias that misinformation creates. when society blames parents for their child's autism or suggests that autistic people are simply opting in for advantage, it adds guilt and suspicion to families who are already fighting for basic support. He does talk about public figures with no expertise in autism amplifying fringe theories, which distracts from the urgent need to invest in evidence-based services. And what Adam calls for is what I am calling for. He says progress is fragile, but now more than ever we all must be vigilant to challenging misinformation wherever it comes from, and to make sure that future generations can look back and see a society that chose to reject that fear and misunderstanding, and that really listened to autistic voices, and that we acted bravely and collectively to ensure everyone has the same chance to thrive. So in terms of protecting against, making progress and protecting against the, misinformation and a shift backwards, we do need to talk about prevalence, which I hear was discussed before I came in, and we do need to talk about language. And what I would be asking the committee today is, I really want to see this committee, particularly in this inquiry, to model language, to lead and to challenge outdated norms and assumptions. So if I could just very briefly, please indulge me, the question has been asked and I will try my best to answer. The reasons why has SEN rates, why are they increasing? I did took maybe a day and just delved back, Northern Ireland specific. So prior to 1959, there was legislation where education could essentially say, no, this child is uneducatable, they are the problem of health. So essentially they were legally excluded from education, particularly for the complex needs, and the state had no duty to educate. That meant people were going into hospital, into institutional care. That was removed in 1959 by the Mental Health Act at that time. So children then did have the right to education, albeit limited, and obviously change takes time. So fast forward to 1978 to the Warnock Report, which is now very outdated in terms of language, but and you'll maybe have seen it referenced in some of the department's material in the reform agenda. But that was really the building block for special education. And one thing I do find interesting in that report was in the report in 1978, it found that at some stage, through the school population at any stage may experience special educational needs would be about 20%. And currently, at the minute, the latest statistics I have in terms of the Northern Ireland school population, those experiencing special educational needs are 19.8%. So when people talk about the rise, or we didn't see it coming in 1978, I think it's Mary Warnock, certainly she saw it coming. So obviously that report then led on to the Education Order in 1986 and beyond. So we saw a shift then from hospital into education settings, which started to create data. Those children were now visible and being counted. Another aspect to this is around about 1980s. I'm going to focus on autism here. There were differential diagnosis for autism, which was childhood schizophrenia, psychosis, emotionally disturbed, and also society labels the pejoratives around lazy, aloof, strange, weird. And I think around that time then we saw autism entering the diagnostic criteria. So we're only at 1980. But essentially, we have to look at other things in the population, survival and life expectancy among certain cohorts of children and young people who have congenital conditions increased. We're doing much better in terms of preterm babies surviving. If you look at the statistics in terms of how that has increased, it's quite significant, and that's a predictable demographic shift, which we should welcome. That's a welcome success. Mm-hmm. But with the survival of more children, the outcomes for them in terms of their neurodevelopmental conditions and development hasn't changed. So whilst they're surviving, we have to accept that within that shift, we will see more children and young people with complex needs. Definitions and diagnosis has broadened and changed over the years. Essentially, I would say it's an identification. We're now recording, and recording has changed over the years, so we do see different numbers. Professional training and understanding has happened, for example, in relation to women or females with autism. Screening tools have changed. And what I would say to the committee is you must distinguish in your own minds between true increases in prevalence and increases in identification. The key point really is that we're doing much better, and I would like to see a narrative in terms of, instead of saying the alarming rise in SEND, that we're saying, look at the progress and improvement that has been made, and we now know our population much, much better. Again, just leading on from that then, in terms of language, when we talk about the most vulnerable young people, often swapped with SEN, is our young children and young people with SEN are not inherently vulnerable. The system often makes them vulnerable. I've heard language within the Assembly around, the demand and the burden that these children are putting on the system, but I find it quite strange that when we've done better, when we've identified children, that then we talk about them that way. So essentially that's where I'm at in terms of what I see is we're in a period of opportunity. And while I'm here to answer questions, I suppose I want to put to the committee, particularly at this very early stage, is, will the committee support the system and the three elements of the system through your own scrutiny? Will you support sequencing and readiness? And will you seek joint accountability? And certainly from my perspective, I would like to see each element of the education system sitting here together and really pushing for that joint accountability. Will you support transparency? And in terms of the cultural piece, will you model and will you lead in terms of language and culture, and will you challenge and call it out?
Thank you, and a really, really helpful initial briefing, and I hope you won't mind me referencing just a private conversation I bumped into Emma in the corridor there just last week, and I think you used the phrase that the children that we talk about in this space have always been with us.
They have, yeah.
We've just got better at seeing them,
yeah.
And I think that I found that a really, really helpful way to look at the whole issue. So that was helpful for me. So because I do think we need to be really, really cautious around our language in this, and to ensure that where actually progress has been made, we are identifying need and trying to meet it, not always succeeding on the trying to meet aspect, but I think the identification of need should be seen as a positive. So I do want to thank you for your work in this space, and I want to thank you for your work over the summer in keeping the issue of placements in particular on the agenda when the media gets distracted and this place isn't sitting. I think that was really important that was done. The first question I was going to ask you was really around the sort of sequencing of events this week around the NAHT intervention, the EA's response and the Minister's statement, if you took comfort from that, but you've already answered that you have taken a degree of comfort that there maybe is some alignment in the system. So I suppose I wanted to highlight, keeping it to placements in particular, the issues then to me possibly threefold. It is really around how much latitude there is in the system to actually ensure that placements are made available where we need them. Is that something that we can do? Do we have the resource to do it? And thirdly, are the places we're creating appropriate? Now, I'm not sure probably that you will want to weigh into the space of resource in too much detail, as you have no control over it.
Yeah.
But could I ask, because obviously the NAHT were very clear in their intervention, we need to stop blaming schools and school leaders. That was their clear articulation. And there did seem to be a reasonably warm response from the EA to that. But you can't also disregard the issue that there have been challenges in getting schools to take placements, specialist provision, for whatever reason. So could I just ask you, do you have a view, and what is your view on how much independence schools should have in that space around taking or not taking a provision, if we're going to get to a place that we provide for the children in the area that they live so that they can get the support they need?
Yeah, I did speak with the EA about this yesterday, trying to kind of probe into that a little bit more. I continue to have a concern in terms of, the culture change that's required and potentially existing misunderstanding around having children with SEN in your school or in your class, or a SPIMS provision. But trying to get that changed right down into school level, into essentially hearts and minds of teachers, all of school staff, Board of Governors, I think is probably the biggest challenge. Whilst I have no issue around the autonomy that schools have, I do find there's a lack of a clear message in terms of what is the overarching thing, what are we trying to achieve in Northern Ireland in schools for children with SEN. Now, I think there's a communication and tone issue that needs to be addressed within the system. I mean, if you're on the outside looking in, listening to media across, the last number of days, there's such a disconnect between, we have a strong message from the Minister. The EA have essentially, said we don't want this to happen again. We hear from the Teachers Association, Head Teachers Association. But one thing that was missing that I found quite interesting was, from that conversation with Dr. Graham Galt, was the reference to the package that's available. And certainly what I'd said to the EA is, you've outlined a very clear package that with numbers, with figures. Why is that not understood or being properly communicated to head teachers? There's a disconnect there, but we don't have time, I think, to dwell on the whys and wherefores. I think it just needs to be, it's there, get it done and do it. I also did talk about good practice in terms of what we see and what children can bring to schools. I've gone out and seen some very good practice. I know personally the benefit of a child being in the right placement and the value of specialist provision. But I think there potentially needs, and it may be that somewhere there's an underlying stigma or misinformation around what a school with a SPIMS looks like, what is added to your school community. I think when it comes to the teaching profession, Dr. Graham outlines it really clearly. They do want the best learning experience for every child. I think there's a distrust in terms of autonomy of schools, problematic how we get down into the schools. I suppose what I can commend to the committee is perhaps it may be worthwhile considering seeking evidence from Middletown Centre for Autism, who go in and do a whole school approach. So where things are potentially really not right, they can be incredibly transformative. Even a school that is doing well, they can also go in and make it better. They would be the experts in terms of that, in terms of permeating right down into school level. Because all of this that happens up here in the periphery won't matter if it's not happening in every single school.
I'll ask one other question, just as we are up against it in terms of time. It's just to that second bit, and you've already started referencing it in your response, that it's around the appropriateness of placement. That it's trying to. I mean, I don't want to rehearse everything that's been spoken over the last number of weeks. Crisis response, emergency approach to placements. I think we're all clear that we must move away from that, and we need to find ways to do that. But inevitably concerns are raised in that context if the placements are appropriate. So I saw in your correspondence with the EA you were almost looking for them to come up with some sort of matrix of how they make that decision. Yes, this is an appropriate placement. Can you outline what do you think an appropriate placement looks like, particularly in terms of where health interacts, the workforce that needs to come into that, and also the physical infrastructure that a child in a specialist placement should have around them? What does that look like?
I can provide a more detailed answer to that. I suppose I can reference sort of what best practice and what school readiness looks like. Obviously depends on the profile of the child. I'm going to give a really short answer, I hope it's still satisfactory, is that I think it's culture. It'll not matter what a school has in place. It doesn't matter what the building is like. It doesn't matter, there's so many variables, but it will come down to the culture within the school and the attitude. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think schools can deliver with the right attitude with very little. I don't think it should be like that, but I think that's the reality.
Look, I'll finish with a comment. If you want to respond to it, you can. But what I'm hearing from your evidence is that you actually are approaching this with a degree of hope. You think there is an opportunity for a reset in terms of culture, of how the system manages placements for children with special educational needs and steps in to meet needs, but that it is not a given that that will all play out as we wish it to, that there are pressures and challenges in the system. There are attitudinal, cultural issues that play that leave the situation still fragile. So hopeful, but very clear that now is the time to step up. Have I understood that correctly?
That's exactly it. Hopeful, but this opportunity must be grasped. I think it's a unique point in time. I think it's between now and Christmas. If everybody doesn't get on board, we're going to see the same thing next year. And I imagine, I want to be back here saying, not that I was right, but that essentially when everybody got on board, we can't afford not to. I think that's the issue. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll bring the Deputy Chair in, and then if members want to indicate through the clerk for...
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Emma, for your presentation. You're on record as describing the North's education system as not having changed since the Industrial Revolution, and a whole generation of children have been traumatised. Can you explain what you see as the main contributing factors towards that?
It's going to be a similar answer to what I said to the Chair, which is culture. When I speak to adults who've had difficult school experiences, it's been a lack of understanding. I do also think that in terms of what I referenced in terms of the Industrial Revolution, that's where education started. But our world has changed so much. And the workplace has changed so much. And one thing I do see is that when I do work within the employment sphere, when I do things with employers, I'm not seeing it's much further ahead. There's just such a disjointed, between the schooling system and are we really preparing young people for today's world? But the change is essentially has to be culture. We have to move away from, punitive, inflexible structures within schools and within school days, and give our children and young people a bit of grace.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand what you're saying. Sometimes one of the most difficult things to change in any system or organisation is the culture.
Absolutely.
And how would you go about bringing about change in the culture?
I think it has to start at the top. And that includes in language and discussions in the Assembly and in the Education Committee itself. I think that one of the most powerful things that can happen in terms of cultural change, and I'm not under any illusions around how difficult it is, but I do think that leaders need to model that change. I think it's really, really important. And I do see, I've been heartened and disheartened watching, the session since the Assembly has come back. There are some who are more in step and in the right place, but I don't think there's not it's not a massive gap. It's not a massive ask to get. But I think if our leaders are not modelling that cultural change that we need to see, then I don't know how we can expect everyone to follow.
And I suppose one of the areas, where it's accepted right across the board. That, in terms of trying to make changes, first of all, there needs to be early intervention, and secondly, there needs to be collaboration across departments. And we're being told that at this stage anyway, that what were originally called multidisciplinary groups, and the name has changed on numerous occasions, and there was that expectation that those multidisciplinary groups were going to be we're going to have allied health professionals in them, so that as a school needed that sort of wraparound support, it would call on the multidisciplinary teams and so on. But now we're being told that these what are now called local impact teams, and that I put a caveat in there, that name may have changed again, I'm not sure. But I suppose the point is that they're not going to be populated by allied health professionals now. And how much of a backward step is that? And how important is that collaboration between education and health?
Critical. And I suppose in terms of what I was saying and getting that joint accountability, health should be at the table as well with the other parts of the education system. And certainly one thing, I mean, we all hear the phrase about siloed working. It certainly is a real thing in terms of operationally how things take place, and it's very, very frustrating. But there has to be an acknowledgement that no matter what schools do, no matter what they have in place, children in schools do need support from allied health professionals. They absolutely do. I think we're a bit of an outlier in terms of where we are with supporting children in schools. Having listened to people at the Congress, and even in Ireland, the approach is different. And I think that's something that needs to not detract from the progress that needs to be made, but it needs to be a real point of, look, if this is going to work, and if you're going to have all those special skills, this is the part that needs to be backed in for those children to thrive. The other impact, I think, in terms of the sort of AHPs and local impact teams is the impact on teachers themselves. Teachers are teaching professionals, but I think it's very unfair that they would be required to do some of the medical interventions that they are required to do. I think the impact on teachers in terms of how then they deal with their day-to-day, that's eating up their capacity. And if we're sorry, yes,
no, you're okay.
That's me.
Yeah,
thank
Okay,
you.
thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So, Danny, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time and all the work that you're doing in the field. I suppose I really want to come at this and say I have hope for next year as well. I really do. But when I look at my caseload and the parents I'm working with, just you see it, the placements issue, and then it's the reduced timetables, and I suppose I would like to hear your experiences, what you're picking up on that there for those children who end up on a reduced timetable, or the kids who aren't in a place now, because I don't know of one example of a child being offered a place in mainstream and the place isn't ready for them.
Yeah.
Like I think like the whole media narrative for the last couple of weeks are picking up on 6 children in that place this year, but reality it's in the hundreds still, because they're all still sitting at home.
Yeah.
So just want to feel like where can we feel hope in that there, because I'm already picking up reduced timetables again this year, so I'm only a week after transport.
Yeah. I mean, you're getting the same issues that I have, and whilst I mean we can't undo, and this is the sad thing, we can't undo the harm and the trauma that's already been caused to families. My hope is in moving forward with what the opportunity that's in front of us. One of the things I did want to raise was essentially the invisible children within the system. So the numbers talked about since really the end of June don't reflect what I'm seeing, which is my child has not been in school for 2 years. I'm working through that with the EA. I have a massive concern that there are children out of school on reduced timetables, asked to leave for a few weeks to come back, all those scenarios that is held by the school and not shared. I'm talking to the EA about the disincentives that exist in sharing that with the EA. If you put someone on a reduced timetable or you've informally excluded them, that's illegal. As a school, how do you feel about sharing that with the EA to ask for support? But I am concerned there are hundreds of children out of school. Hundreds.
Because this is what I'm picking up, and it almost feels like the fate changes for parents. It almost goes from the fate with the EA, and if the EA are misplacing children, so that it always has to come back to the Department of Education and the Minister. But if the EA is misplacing, then the parent is then focused on the school, and the school's being burdened with that there, and then they just can't handle it. Because there is examples of cases I've had where when the parents came to me and said, should I accept this place? And I've actually started saying to some of them, particularly this year, was go and talk to the school leader. You lay out what your child needs and see what they say to you. See, more often than not, the parent then knows that place isn't there, but their link officer's telling them that's the only place available. So the question is, again, I want to keep it to the hope. I would like to see it for next year, but I'm still not convinced that the EA are not doing it by numbers. So they're looking at us at data. Like, we have not placed, but that's not the reality out there.
Yeah.
And
That's something I'm digging into, and something I won't give up on is in terms of those. This has to happen anyway in terms of the Education Authority and the department, and what we've heard this week, that has to go ahead. But in the interim, I don't want to get those other children to be left behind. They don't easily appear in the numbers. I mean, I discussed that with the Education Authority yesterday, and whatever that reveals, I mean, I can certainly share with the Education Committee, but it needs to be, it's not going to be easy, I think, to track some of these children. And there's a level of acceptance that when you're asked to, your child's timetables are just, or when you're asked to keep your child at home, there becomes a point where you just accept it. It's not acceptable, not ever. And yeah, hopeful, but not. I'm not hopeful entirely broadly. There's still a lot of work to do outside what we've heard of the last few days.
and to see the wee factor, because it doesn't cost any money to communicate to parents how poor that has been again this year, whether that's on placements, on transport. Real simple communications have not happened, and I think that's really, really unfair. And then going forward, you can have all the money in the world, if you can't communicate to the people who are impacted, I feel like they don't understand it then.
Yeah, the transport's
final response.
Yeah, the transport's a real bee in my bonnet as well. And another thing, I mean, I'm taking forward with the EA. We spoke about it, albeit briefly, yesterday, but it's a nonsensical issue in this day and age. It makes no sense, and it is unfair.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that point around, you might have hope around placements. There are so many pressures within the system, and hopefully the inquiry will draw out how those are connected. Because you can get the placement done timely, it can be the right placement, but if there's no support services that then come in, we have a real issue, or if the culture in the schools wrong. Okay, John, you'd indicated next.
Yeah, just sort of a preamble. I absolutely agree. All conversations with these issues should be, made with compassion and without judgment. To assist people in that, because sometimes we have to ask questions, they're very difficult when we're not specialists, generalists, if you like. Is there an acceptable language guide that's useful for people like us or the lay members of the public to be able to use, teachers, about words that we shouldn't use or should use?
I don't know if there's one specific for Northern Ireland, but it's certainly something, if there's an interest, it is on my long to-do list. I have had discussions around supporting MLAs in terms of language. It's not always perfect, we do get it wrong, it's not the end of the world, but it does help. Language does shape how policy is developed and what works. So if that's something you'd be interested in, I can certainly work on that and connect with yourselves around language. And
It'd be very useful, thank you. The second issue was, do you agree that children with SEN, special education needs, are at a higher risk, particularly in mainstream school, of either being misunderstood by teachers, and I think you said there's a higher percentage of bullying, like discipline, and second of all, because I don't want to get into the space that the Justice Minister got into, I want to just say, so with teachers, there's a higher risk of misunderstanding children with SEN, and disciplining things that are actually linked to their condition, number one, and is there also a higher risk of bullying from other pupils?
The second point, bullying, I'll be honest, it's not something that I regularly would hear of in terms of bullying. I think, again, in terms of where we are nowadays, bullying does happen, there's no doubt about it, and disproportionately can be in relation to children with SEN, but children are much more understanding sometimes than the adults. And in terms of misunderstanding children, I think, I just reflecting back on the email I had from Dr. Graham Galt, teachers don't want to be complicit in something that isn't right or potentially damaging for children, but it comes to the education piece and the mindset that starts at the start of your teaching career. But if you're in the middle or near the end of your teaching career, there's immense resources out there which help you understand a child's behaviour. Essentially what it comes down to is, be open, be curious about that individual that's standing right in front of you there and then, and non-judgmental. It's not, I know we have training courses and there's lots to consider. It isn't actually rocket science. What's in front of you as a child, essentially?
Your values, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that comes in at the point. So last week we heard from the Education Training Inspector about the vital role inspection plays, both for safeguarding and standards, as well as spotting cultures. Would it be your view that unimpeded, that inspection is a vital role in actually protecting children with special education needs? What's your view on that?
I can state it quite simply. I cannot see any circumstance in which an inspection should not be allowed to proceed. I think it's absolutely critical, and I probably quite controversially, I've consulted, replied to the consultation on that piece of legislation, and I would support that. Potentially it's the background I come from, but I can't see why. Regulation is good for everybody, but and inspections, and I don't understand why an inspection wouldn't happen.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to make my point clear, I made it last week, I think those who oppose the legislation are on the wrong side of history on this, and I think there should be no disruption of inspection, and it is about the safeguarding of children and not about the comfort of adults. So I do thank you for that. The final point I just want to make is around this issue of being compassionate, and use the word, but curious.
Just no time,
Yeah,
just to be a
time.
very quick final one.
And I still am curious, and I think it's vital to be curious about things like trends, disproportionality, apparent disproportionality, where the figures are going if they continued. Because we talk about demand, and that's a very, but whenever you're delivering public services, you actually have to model demand. I know it's not nice language because you're talking about real human beings, same as when you deal with bed spaces and things, and increase in COVID, you would have modeled demand, but these are people who are dying. So in terms of, and I just want to make this point, it's not so much a question.
I'll ask quickly because I've given everyone pretty
I
strict
do
on
think
time
it is
and
vitally
you're over time
important
now.
that we do not duck away from asking important questions, trying to sense what the increase is, why there's an increase. That's a very useful point you said about children who are born premature, might be at higher likelihood. I hadn't considered that. And I think one of the benefits of getting this information is it allows us to fill the void and stop disinformation. Because we need educated about this. I didn't consider that, and I'm glad that you raised it. I now fully understand it. So I just want to make that point, that I actually think more information about this is actually vital.
I'll have to just really move on because I've given you a fair bit
I've
of
got my two
latitude
good
there
questions
on
that I'm
time.
pleased with.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Michelle, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emma, for the really powerful evidence. I think you've given us all a bit of a jolt in the right direction today. I know what I mean. That I know I've probably used some of the phrases that you've highlighted, not in any way intentionally, but I know for a fact I have. So I think definitely grateful to have that awareness. I agree, if you can keep us right, please do, always. There's been a lot covered. I kind of want to go back to the misinformation bit. I would like you just to stay a bit more on any concerns you have around that growing narrative in that space, because I do think it's really important. We've seen misinformation spiral in lots of different ways across education, and the conversation becomes distorted and we put our time and energy talking about the wrong things. So please highlight for us perhaps what you think is driving that misinformation and how we can be vigilant to that, to make sure that we don't allow those conversations to start to spiral in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I was going to comment to what John had said around if these issues in terms of prevalence and cause and trends remain a repeat issue, as with misinformation does tend to raise more questions than it has answers, and you can spend a lot of time following a line. I mean, the vaccine thing has come up again. It's been completely debunked, but it is arising again.
Agree with you.
But I think if it is going to be a distraction in this inquiry, while there may not be capacity to research it, you'll either have to make a decision, and we have to look at this and decide, or we just accept the population is as it is and we need to work with it. And the other question is in terms of prevalence and cause and the questions, and even around misinformation, to what end? To what end? So if you did do a piece of research, to what end? So what do you find? Do you then decide, right, well, where we actually now think that these children don't deserve the support. So you have to really ask, to what end do I want to look into this? In terms of misinformation, I mean, I spoke, although it hasn't been broadcast yet, around an article in The Spectator. Very unpalatable. Wish it hadn't had airtime at all, and it hasn't, and hopefully won't. But it was around parents gaming the system, women around dinner tables trying to get their child 10 more minutes to get ahead. I mean, I don't really want to go into the detail because I don't want to give it any more airtime. But in terms of misinformation, I mean, I'm happy to provide a report to the committee if it would inform where I see the risks. It was a massive point of discussion at the European Congress, and it causes great hurt and distress, not only to, we're not talking about autism, we're talking about disabled people. But while I'm happy to speak more on it, I don't want to give it too much airing because I don't want to generate too much discussion around it in this setting, but I can certainly link in with the committee.
But I think that's helpful in itself, what you've said. I think it's keen we want to get to. We want to keep focused on this inquiry. Yeah. We want to talk about the issues that are here now that need to be resolved. So I think that's helpful for us if we start to veer off into directions that aren't.
I can let you know.
Yeah, but do, because this needs to be productive, what we're doing.
I think it needs to be focused in terms of time, but there are so many distractions out there. We just need to keep a real clear focus on where we're going, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And if we go off on a tangent, why and to what end?
I have one more question, and it's broad but deliberately so. I think we talk a lot about the placements issue, and it's really, really important. Danny, you have touched on some of the other broader issues, and Emma, I know that you're aware of just the full scale of the pressures within special educational needs. So where in particular do you want to highlight? You've mentioned transport. Can you tell us a bit more about the specific concerns you have within the transport system connected to this?
Yeah, in terms of transport, I've had numerous messages and emails. I think there's a communication issue. I did discuss this with the EA yesterday, and I think there needs to be better communication about who is picking your child up and what checks have been going through.
Just that we're in like the 17th of September and you're still...
Yeah, no, and it will be probably, but by Christmas. I think there's also a sense of, I appreciate, particularly with late placements, timing and all of this is difficult. But if you're a child in a special school and you're going into your last year and you've been going to school that whole time and your taxi doesn't turn up, what does that tell you? I find that to be very hurtful for that child and that family. I think you need to look at transport as not just a means of getting a child from A to B, but it goes right to the heart of belonging. You know, there's no point in having a place for a child who can't get there, but they need to be starting with their peers. I think that's really, really important. And in today's age, with the technology we have and software, we're talking about getting children to schools. We have firms logistically that get, I mean, I still can't quite fathom how my post gets from A to B and how my Amazon parcels arrive multiple times a day. But if that can, there are ways and means, but this is more important than a parcel. This is a child, and I think that really needs to be looked at in that sense.
I have to ask to draw that to a close, but I've no doubt we will look at transport in the inquiry, and I think transport is a really big part of this. And I think, and we're not here to talk about cost, but actually I think there's a huge amount of waste in the transport system that is wasted that could be invested in actually meeting the needs of the children who are at the heart of this. So I mean, I think that's a really, really key
safety
issue
as well, because children who are going unsupervised, I'm not content that the taxi licensing system is adequate. There are people, and there was a man recently convicted in court who was a taxi driver who has multiple convictions for all kinds of serious crimes, and the vetting for people who are taking children to school. I hope we're not asked this question simply relying on the fact that the taxi licensing has said they're a fit and proper person, because they've unsupervised access to a child.
Well, we'll absolutely get into that with the EA, and I think we'll have them in on that issue.
Massive problem.
And it goes beyond send transport as well. It's all of that. Okay. David, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. And probably inadvertently, I think you've maybe realised why some may have been sceptical of us asking for research. I have to say, it's my view that the vaccine theory has been debunked long ago. That I was annoyed to see it raise its head again. So John raised it today. We had raised it before. The reason we were asked for research was on a genuine basis to try and give us knowledge that we don't have, that I don't have expertise in, because I think it's right that where there is an issue, not to guess what the outcome of that may be, but to actually get to grips with what are possible causes. And I'm open to the idea that, and I suspect, and maybe we'll talk to this, I suspect that there's probably not agreement across all of those groups that operate in the autism sector, if you will, on what that might be, but it will at least give us an understanding on what some of the views are out there. Can I ask, in terms of something that was discussed earlier in this committee before we got into different issues, but it would come regularly then, was sort of mandatory training for teachers in our schools. And I'm wondering whether you feel that mandatory training for teachers in terms of teaching children with autism is something that the system should aspire to going forward.
I think if you look at the statistics of children with SEN, children with who are autistic, training seems a bit of a no-brainer, really. I think you want to know who you're teaching and what they need. And I think I get a sense that mandatory, I've now learned when you say that, does create a bit of with unions, a little bit of hesitation. But I think this is not about forcing people to learn. I mean, there seems to be a lot of goodwill to learn and do better. Mandatory training would really address that. I think it needs to start at the start of the journey, but I think it needs to be intermittent as well. Certainly in terms of autism, what we know, how we communicate with autistic people and how they experience the world has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. And that's because autistic adults are more open and able to talk about their experiences. But training is essential. It's essential for capacity building in teachers themselves. And just of interest, and apologies, Chair, for going on, but there is a study done in Greece. It's not quite finished yet in terms of evaluation, but the study they went in and they looked at not the children, but they just solely looked at the teachers and their capacity. It was a school with a high number of exclusions. How teachers viewed themselves, their role, the pupils, the options that they had and the tools that they had. And essentially, once the training had finished, there are no more exclusions in the school. But critically, stress levels in teachers went way down. So I think when we talk about capacity in teachers, it's not just in terms of skills or resources, it's also how they manage their own internal stress. Co-regulation is a really powerful tool. So essentially, if you have a child who is struggling and your calm meets their chaos, that's massively impactful. But if our teachers are really under stress, like all of us, it's more difficult to approach, to deal with that with a particular child or young person.
Yeah, and look, I take your point, and in terms of aspects of this may cause issues for unions and so on. I am, and I don't mean to be disparaging towards unions, but I think particularly in this space we're focused on the children, and we work with teachers to try and make that as smooth as possible. But I think the focus has to be on making it work. At the moment, it's not, and certainly from special school leaders, what I heard whenever I engaged with them was quite often that schools were whenever places came up with special schools, and similarly for teaching assistants in this regard, were intimidated by the idea of working in a special school because they had not had that experience during their training. And so it seems to me some mandatory element would be beneficial. Would you be agreed with that? I
would agree with that, yes. And I mean, in terms of training and learning, I think it's always a really positive thing to keep improving yourself. I suppose as an aside, and I'm not stating this as an actual position that I have, but in the special schools that I've been in, I think for teachers who have not taught even for a short time in a special school are really missing out. there's a lot to learn from children and teachers alike in a special school. There's something really unique about going into a special school, and I think as a teacher, being in that space can only benefit you. I mean, we are connecting, engaging at very early stages with stimulus. But yes, I mean, if a teacher wants to do better for their pupils, training's part of the package.
Particularly even the mainstream now as a teacher, you're likely. Could I just ask very quickly then, in terms of your own engagement, because you've been working in this space, have you been at this stage engaging with many local groups that have been operating in the autism field, and what is reflected back to you as their priorities in terms of
a really short response? It's a wide-ranging question, so it may be difficult. But
I try my best, but I'm one person. I have very limited capacity. Happy to chat around that at another time.
Okay. I'm going to bring Cathy in.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, Emma, for your evidence here today. It really has been enlightening. I had wanted sort of to steer the conversation to childcare and early years. And it's something, I suppose, for me, it's actually a bugbear. Since I took my role on this committee, I hear the word early intervention over and over and over again, and every single document that's produced, I hear early intervention. And I would like to get sort of your view on this. I'm not sure that there is actually an understanding of what early intervention means, or what it should look like. I think if we were serious about early intervention, you know, we wouldn't have these huge shocks in the system whenever it comes to placements, and we certainly wouldn't have new local impact teams set up that don't have allied health professionals in them. But that's my own view. And I would be really keen to get what your view would be on early intervention and what it should look like, and specifically around early years and childcare.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I'm not entirely sure I know myself what early intervention is. It is put out there, and it's not always clear what it means. In terms of what it should look like, I suppose, when a child or a family have a difficulty, whatever that is, that's the need that needs support at that particular time. I suppose the emotional health and wellbeing framework does address that to some extent, and instead of having parents on waiting lists to be able to access a service, that the need that is there at that moment can be addressed. It's too early days, I suppose, now to say how that would look. But there is no doubt in terms of early years and childcare that it has to be right, because those are formative years in terms of development, belonging, capacity for parents as well. I mean, in terms even of childcare, I mean, having had two children avail of childcare, I appreciate how unbelievably expensive it is. But the impact, when parents have been brave enough to speak out and say, this is the impact it has on my life, and this is what it looks like. Again, you're eating away at parents' capacity to do what they need to do, which is parent their child and support them. I can't give you a definitive answer in terms of early years and what I think it should look like. I do think that children's needs, children with additional needs, children with disability, with autism, those needs are also human needs. And I think when we talk about early intervention, that we're not putting something on top of what essentially is a human need. I think everybody should be entitled to the support that they need in the way the rest of us can access it. Yes, it needs to be tailored, but it also needs to be available mainstream and in our community. I'm sorry, Cathy, I don't really know that that's answered your question. I'm happy to engage later around early intervention.
No, that's great, Emma. In terms of the early years preschool sector, I often find in conversations with those professionals that they feel they're kind of the forgotten sector, specifically when it comes to children with special educational needs. And really, it's the goodwill of the sector that is supporting those children at the minute. And again, I suppose you've sort of said you don't know what that should look like, but even we're anxiously waiting on a childcare and early years strategy. Have you had any sort of dealings with the minister or that group that is developing that strategy? Because to me, and again, early intervention is such a wide-ranging thing, but early years, like you say, is the ideal opportunity where we should be capturing children and supporting these children and their parents.
I haven't had any conversations or engagement in relation to the strategy. I will now. I'll go and look at that. But I do know it was actually in relation to the nature outdoor education. I connected in with a nursery, and I mean what they do there is quite phenomenal. And they have a broad range of needs, high support needs, and how they manage that. But also what I was really interested in was the innovation within that setting itself, and what they've been able to achieve. But what you can see is those children who have been able to avail of a placement like that, the transition into primary school is much easier, and you can start to identify and address the needs that are there. But unfortunately, in terms of capacity, I have to make hard choices on where I can focus my time, but I will certainly have a look at that strategy and see how I can
when
help.
we get it, when we finally get to see it.
Yes.
Good point to draw a
Thank
line.
you.
So thank you, Kathy. Look, that does bring us to the end of our session. I think it's been a really helpful opener to our inquiry. Obviously, we're looking at placements, but some of the broader issues that you've brought to the table, I think, will really help how we frame our commentary around this and how we look at the issues. I'm sure you will be back before too long, and we really do appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, members, before we move on through the agenda, I'm going to suggest that any of this evidence now we hear in the inquiry, there may not always be actions arising from it. I'm content that we note that evidence and it go into the inquiry papers, unless members have anything in particular they want to raise. No, content. Okay, so that moves us on to item 8 on the agenda. I'll just do my usual check-in at this point. Conscious it's coming up to 4. Is anyone seeking a quick comfort break, or are we happy to proceed? Okay, so I've asked to be back at 4, so we can keep to hopefully finish in a reasonable time. Thank you. Open session, and that brings us on to item 8 of the agenda, which is an oral briefing from the Education Authority, again on SEND placements. So while the witnesses are just brought through, I will refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 46, a briefing paper from the Education Authority at page 47 of your packs, and then we have correspondence from SEND Reform NI at page 54 of your packs. So I let the witnesses get seated. So you're all very welcome here today. Just for members' benefit, broadly the purpose of today's briefing is to look at the issue around SEND placements, and particularly lessons learned from what has gone before and the preparatory work that is underway in terms of future planning and any of the challenges associated around that. So very welcome today. We have Hanna, Chief Operations Officer within the EA. We have Peter Canavan, Programme Director of SEND Placements in the Education Authority, and Tomas Adell, Chief Transformation Officer within the EA. So you're very welcome. Apologies for the delay. For once it wasn't an evidence session that overran, it was all the items we had on our agenda before then all took an incredibly long amount of time to get through, so I do appreciate your patience in waiting. I really just hand over to yourselves at this stage for the usual 10-minute initial presentation, and then we'll move into question and answer from members at that stage. So it's over to yourselves.
Thank you. Look, Chair, we are going to have the briefest of introductory comments, because I know probably that it's better to have the questions and then we get into the debate with members. So look, I suppose just at the outset, I suppose what I wanted to reiterate on behalf of the Education Authority is, as an organisation, that supports children with special needs, that is our absolute number one priority. And I just want to call that out from the outset, that as an organisation, that is our number one priority. And today, I'm joined by our new Chief Transformation Officer, Tomas Adell, whose initial focus is to work with DE to deliver the necessary transformation to our SEND system. As an executive team, we've sought to support this work by ensuring Tomas can focus primarily on that, and to that extent, in terms of the capacity and the placements piece, that work moving forward is going to sit with me. So in essence, what you have in the executive team within the Education Authority are 2 chief officers that have a focus on SEN, both in terms of the here and now and the delivery that we need to do for the children in terms of capacity, but also that medium longer term piece. So I just wanted to reiterate that as an organisation, we are really focused on trying to make improvements for our SEN children. In terms of moving to placements, I suppose I feel actually a little bit conflicted in terms of that, and thinking about what I was going to say today. And to one extent, and look, we've talked about it before, and we've used the numbers. This year we've created over 1,370 places. That has been an absolutely huge effort in terms of the teams that have been involved within the Education Authority. It's been a huge effort with the schools that have been involved in that. That has involved about 150 odd schools, 120 odd schools, and an additional 150 classes. And yes, in terms of the headline figure, we have got to zero. And I know some people might say, well, you know, that's a tick box, you've got to zero. But the reality is, actually, we know that that's not enough, and it hasn't been good enough because there have been delays in placing some of those children. We know that what we're actually doing is already stretching existing capacity across many schools that are already stepping up to the plate. So whilst in one hand we've done a huge amount, on the other hand there's still so much more to do. But I do have to recognise that our teams and our staff have worked hugely hard to try and achieve what we have achieved. And I suppose in terms of looking forward to September 26, we're already focused on that. And I know that maybe there's some narrative out there that we leave planning to the last minute. That is not the case. We are constantly planning year on year to try and achieve what we can in terms of increasing capacity across the system. I know that very recently, on Monday, Dr. Graham Galt, there was an open letter to the Minister and the Department and EA. We really welcome that. This really is about moving to a new phase, and we believe that with that engagement, we can really maybe change the dial in terms of getting placements for next year. We're going to work really hard. I've already reached out to NITC to put in place arrangements to set up a meeting. We really want to work with the trade union partners. I think it's probably telling. It looks a little bit like the system broadly is coalescing around the fact that we do need to have more schools stepping up to the plate and taking on board specialist provisions. Our commitment from an Education Authority view is if we can do that now, early, if we can get that over the next 8 to 10 weeks, then I think we can have a much more organised, timely transition for children and young people moving into school next year. And I know there's a pressure on schools. I get that this is a pressure on school leaders, but my focus is on the children and young people. Because what I really want are those parents and those children to experience a normal transition into their new school for September 26. So we're optimistic. I know that school leaders will step up to the plate, and we are going to work really hard in terms of that for September 26. So I'm just going to ask, Tomas is going to speak a little from his perspective.
It's great to be here today. Thank you for inviting us over to come. And it's great to be in the role, to have the opportunity to help support transformation of special educational needs. That's something I take as a great honour and a great opportunity going forward. The split in Education Authority from the placements and SEN transformation, it's really significant. That means we're building capacity to help support the immediate needs of children now, but also looking at how we can improve outcomes of children in the future. Because that is what we want to do. That's our aims, to have better outcomes for all children, including children with special educational needs. This transformation is a key priority for the authority and for the department, and working jointly together, we are keen to implementing the reform agenda and to find and to get better outcomes for children and young people. You've got the briefing paper already. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I just want to really highlight that the local impact teams, which went live on Monday this week, is one of the starting points, one of the starting blocks to allow transformation or in practice. The impact teams is evidence of a great piece of work to looking at what the children need, by combining 8 services into one service to look at the focus on the child rather than the service title. It's a starting point too. It's not the end product. It's a starting product of finding better outcomes for children. It's a child-centered approach where we remove barriers for staff to provide better work for children. The staff are already doing great work. Removing the barriers to get tailored support for children will do that work, will get the outcome of that work become even better. It's not perfect. We're working on that, and we will improve the teams going forward. But this is the first stage of building a platform for where we can build other work. We're also, transformation of SEN is not just transforming what's happening with children, transforming how EA works. That's really important. We have a huge amount of dedicated staff. They work really hard, but we as an organization don't always support our staff to deliver the best outcomes. So the internal transformation of our electronic systems or digitization of this process is a good example of that, where we have 3 different systems. That's a lot of manual input, but combined into one system, which will go live in term 2, we'll have a much more streamlined system where staff can spend time focusing on the children rather than on paperwork. That will allow the staff to focus on the right things that's important for them, will help parents see what's happening with the children in real time, but also allow our staff to speak with the parents so we can get better outcomes for children. It becomes a positive effect. That's another cornerstone on which you can build future transformation internally. I'm not going to talk about those things in details. You have more details in the briefing packs. We're of course very happy to take questions on this and everything else. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll focus on placements initially. I mean, other members may, want to broaden things out with their questions. I'll stick with placements in the first instance. So, I mean, I do want to acknowledge the work to deliver places, and I think anybody, working out of their constituency office over the summer will have understood the level of distress parents were experiencing still over that period. But I do want to acknowledge that there was a sense that the EA staff were probably working at a pitch and a pace that was probably not ideal in terms of their own well-being and the volume of work, and that was noted. There did seem to be a huge effort being channeled into that, and I think that's important to note. But it doesn't mean that necessarily the outcome is where we wanted it to land. Raw numbers, it's great, but Dale, you have acknowledged that the journey to get to that point is not the journey any of us want to be on. But I think that's clear, and I don't think anybody's trying to say anything other than that. I think the intervention from NAHT was very welcome, but it does, and I want to be clear here, I think if there's room for positivity here, that there's a window of opportunity, and we heard that really clearly from the autism reviewer, then I want to welcome that. And she described it as that she has hope, but she feels the situation is fragile. So we have to take the opportunity that we have now. Just looking at the September 26 planning, there's a whole range of other issues in the system. But I did just want to draw out in terms of that fragility, if that's okay, to just get a sense of how we're managing that. Intervention from NAHT was welcome, but there is a differential in opinion, because Dale, you're clearly saying today, we always plan early, we go early, we're doing this on a cycle. NAHT letter was, this happens too late. So, I mean, I don't know whether both those things can be true at the same time, and I don't really want to explore that. But in terms of where we are now, if you're saying you're getting in early, what are the barriers that you're now facing? If everybody's at the table, everyone's engaging, what are the barriers to delivering placements on a planned basis? Is it the autonomy of schools? Is it your resource? Is it that you don't know the numbers of children? What can you help me understand what are those barriers?
Yeah, so I suppose working backwards in that, Chair, I don't think it's necessarily not knowing the numbers. As the year progresses, we refine the numbers. So we will broadly know, we've said before, we think it's another 12, 13, 1,400 children. We'll know where the pressure areas are, and there'll be similar pressure areas. It'll be Greater Belfast, it'll be, Newry and Down.
There's not a data gap. There's no data gap, really.
There's no data
so it's
gap
not the
in that
numbers.
regard.
Is it autonomy of schools? Is it resource?
I think my observation is I think schools clearly have a reluctance because they feel they're going to be unsupported, and it's kind of one of these paradoxes. But by the time we get to say April, May, the EA has less time to put in place the arrangements to support the schools. If they do say yes, the school themselves have less time to prepare. So in terms of recruiting staff, be that teaching or non-teaching support staff, that becomes then hugely complicated. I think the autonomy piece plays a role in that. So ultimately the schools have to agree, they have to give us permission in terms of setting up those specialist provisions, and I think some of that decision making in previous years has been slow within particular schools, and some of that has dragged on late on in the year. So we might have started out with a view that you know, school X seems keen and the principal might seem keen, but the principal then has to take that to the Board of Governors. So there's a number of dynamics there. I think.
Could I ask, just to pick up on that then, Adell, you've mentioned the concerns around support, so that schools are concerned they're not going to be either supported or resourced or both to deliver this if they say yes. You're going out to schools now, and I absolutely take that as a good faith assurance. You are actively doing that. What package are you offering to schools? So if you're sitting with a principal in front of you, what are you telling them that you will put in place to support them? What's on offer from the EA?
So at a very basic level, the offer includes a £3,000 setup allowance, full, and I mean total full central budget cover for staffing costs. So if it ultimately, it will start out with the minimum of one teacher, the cost of one teacher, and 2 classroom assistants. However, if the profile of pupils in that particular setting means that we need to add an additional 3rd classroom assistant, for example, we will cover that. So they get the full cost of that. Then there's annual LMS allocations, which can range from £18,000 to £46,000, depending on what there is. And they also get, so for example, if there's additional accommodation required, we would know that there would be additional running costs of that building, heat, light, etc. Then there's an additional allowance made for that as well. Okay. And in certain circumstances, depending on the individual school, we will look at those individual circumstances and maybe make another type of allowance based on what that circumstance is at that school.
With that offer and that package that you're going out with, which I think has been clearly articulated before, but there still seems to be a lack of trust that it will be delivered. If you're going out to schools now with that offering, so 2 questions. Do you know the schools right now and the locations that you need these specialist provisions in to deliver what we need for September 2026? That's the first question.
First answer is yes.
Yeah, so you do know that?
Absolutely.
So the second question then is, when do you need to have that nailed down to be able to deliver it? When do you need to have schools signed in the dotted line so you can deliver it?
Look, I think that if we can get our plan on the back of Graham's letter is to set something up with schools, and we don't know exactly what that will look like over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So if we could get to the Halloween break period, and we certainly had the vast majority of schools in a position where they were we're ready to go, then I think that would give us an absolutely brilliant starting point for September 26th.
Do you have capacity within the EA to get to that point? If schools work with you in the time?
Yeah, I'll come back to that. Just the bit about the resource I think is interesting. I think when schools say they don't have resource, I think what they're really saying is they can't get access to teachers and classroom assistants in time. And some of that is back to because they've agreed late on in the year, because obviously schools have delegated responsibility for employing teachers and their school-based staff themselves. So that is their responsibility. I think if we can get in a position where a school knows there's more certainty around school access going to do this for next year, A, they can go about the business of recruiting on a more timely basis, or B, EA can find a way to support schools, for example, and we've already done that. To set out like a classroom assistant kind of NISTRA type approach. So if we know what the scale of it is early, then we can reorganise ourselves, Chair, and the resource that we currently have to do the more meaningful work in terms of what's needed to support the schools. Do we need more resource? I don't know the answer to that. It may be that we need more resource, but I'm keen to utilise the resource that I have now in the best way possible, and I'd rather do that, be in a position where everything that we do is actually not nugatory and it's actually impactful and it makes a difference and it's supporting schools. So if we could get schools in a position where they were comfortable with moving forward with a specialist provision next year, we would reorganise ourselves. We have a programme of work. A huge amount of that is actually spent on engaging with schools to get them to agree. Mm-hmm. Well, we can reallocate that resource to go about supporting schools in a different way.
This is some of the clearest articulation I've heard in this forum of just what is going to happen, and that's encouraging. I take encouragement from that, so we obviously need to keep a close eye on that. I just want to ask one other question. I don't want to eat up all of the time with my questions. In terms of the risks to all of that, one of the things I just picked up from your report was around your staffing complement the Centrelink officers. You raised around, since 2021, there's been almost 20 rounds of recruitment for those roles, and we've been aware of periods of time when there's been significant gaps. When I talked about staff pressure over the summer, that's a cohort of your staff who were under immense pressure, immense pressure. Is that a stable workforce that you have there? Are you having issues with retention? Because if you don't have the link officers, you can't place children. They are absolutely critical in that process. So what does that workforce look like? Do you have what you need, and are there risks around retention?
There are risks around. They are a relatively stable workforce. They're a hugely committed workforce, and they genuinely care about the children, young people that they're working with parents. But yes, there is a risk in terms of retention because they burn out. I mean, the reality is that they have to deal with some really difficult conversations with parents who are, you know,
they're the lightning
quite
rods.
rightly
They're the lightning rods for the frustration.
Really anxious with what they do. But again, Chair, back to, I mean, my simple view of this is that if we have schools right now that have agreed, then what we're doing is giving certainty to the system that these places are already in the system. And look, we will have other teams maybe physically creating the spaces, but the point is for the SEND link officers, when they start to have conversations with parents and talking about options, the fact that we know that School X is going to be coming online, they can have those conversations with those parents. Those parents can make decisions, informed decisions on a timely basis about the school they may well like to go to. They can go and visit that school, and I think that in itself then takes pressure off that workforce. So by getting schools, getting more certainty about the number of schools that would be in a position to take specialist provisions early, the fact of that is that we take a huge amount of pressure off that workforce and make that a much more less contentious, highly pressurised aspect of what they're delivering. They'll still be busy. It's still that they're not going to be busy, but it would certainly really, really, really have a huge positive impact on that particular group of staff who do work really hard.
Busy's fine. Push to breaking point, which is some of the language I've heard within the EA, you know, and I don't think it's been hyperbole. I think that has been the case for a lot of those staff. Just last question then, what's the vacancy rate in SEND link officers at the moment, and what's the sickness rate like currently in terms of where we are now? Because this is a cohort of staff that need to be operational.
I don't have that particular figure, but
there are vacancies.
There are vacancies,
and there has been substantial sickness over the summer period.
They don't look, And internally as well, it's one of those posts where other staff look at that and kind of go, "Why would I apply for that job?"
Do you have a plan to fill those vacancies?
Absolutely, and I think if we could have this next, as you know, we probably have a short window to try and achieve a really strong positive outcome with schools. If we can get that, I think that will be a real boost to the workforce in there, and they will want to be in and they will want to support children and young people because they're absolutely child-centred individuals. They really, really are.
Deputy Chair, I'll bring in other members want to indicate.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Dale. And after your last appearance at the committee, Dale, you became a bit of a TikTok sensation. So I'm just going to focus on the question that I was asking you at that time.
Right.
And I suppose now, at that time you told us no grammar schools had a specialist provision class. Has that changed at all?
So I was incorrect in that. So there are 2 existing grammar schools that have specialist provisions, and I answered in terms of at that point in time there were no new grammar schools. So
there were 2 then.
There were 2,
and there are 2
and there
now.
are still 2 now. Yes.
Right. So there's been no improvement.
Well, again, as I've articulated previously, and hopefully this isn't a TikTok repeat.
You know about TikTok, Jill? I mean, that's
I didn't know about
he
TikTok.
Didn't until the next morning.
Okay. Deputy Chair, I suppose my focus is on where the main pressures are right now, and we know that the main pressures for placements are within nursery and the primary school setting. However, moving forward, we know that within 2 to 3 years, that spike is going to move into the post-primary sector as well. When we say that we know where all the schools are in terms of the need is, that includes all schools across all sectors. So we will be expecting engagement across every sector of school, including the grammar schools. Above and beyond that, Deputy Chair, we already have arrangements in place to meet with the Governing Association of the voluntary grammar schools. And I know, and we spoke previously in a different forum, that they are willing to step up to the plate and take on take on the responsibility for specialists.
Fair enough, and we'll keep an eye on that. And I want to move into the primary sector because, as you say yourself, that's where most of the spaces are needed. Only 26% of schools thus far have set up specialist provision, and the vast majority of those in the primary sector are in disadvantaged and deprived areas. The schools that already carry the largest burden in terms of children with free school meals, newcomer children, and so on. Can you explain why that is the case? That it's those who are already doing the heavy lifting now have to do more? And why is the burden not spread out more among other, and particularly in more affluent areas?
I suppose, Chair, I would answer that in the terms that EA has been making the case for the last year that actually more schools need to take on the responsibility to set up specialist provisions. So I'm not going to disagree with you in the sense that a lot of schools are carrying a huge responsibility in terms of all the different social needs that are out there, particularly across the different, I suppose, societal issues. So I'm not going to disagree with that. I agree, more schools need to take on specialist provisions.
Do you have an explanation as to why schools aren't, particularly the schools in more affluent areas? Well, why is it the schools in the disadvantaged areas that have to do the heavy lifting?
I don't think that it's necessarily that it's a black and white line between disadvantaged areas and areas that might not be considered disadvantaged.
It appears to be from the statistics.
I think that some of the profile of children with special additional needs will be within those geographical areas and disadvantaged areas as well.
I mentioned the case to Adell of a school in Andersonstown, where one of the pupils who is attending the SPIM is actually being taxied in from Downpatrick. And that's surely not the best case scenario.
And when we spoke about that, I absolutely agreed with you. That is not ideal, and we don't want that to be the case. Hence why we're continually making the case that more schools need to be able to set up specialist provisions so that children in whatever their geographical area or whatever their background is can go to their local school with their local peers. That's absolutely, that's EA's position. That's what we want to achieve as the outcome. And if schools can see it, that they would agree to setting up specialist provision, then I think we can rectify some of those concerns and issues that you're raising.
Okay, fair enough.
The final question.
The two short questions. First of all,
two short answers, please. Then
has the name of the local impact teams changed again? And secondly, the autism reviewer was in prior to yourselves coming in, and she says she knows of hundreds of children who aren't at school. What would you say to that?
Well, local impact team name hasn't changed, so we can confirm that.
Good answer on the second one. Yeah.
In terms of the hundreds of children, I think we need to be clear. Those are children, and we've met with Emma, and we're going to engage with Emma further in that. Those are children where the perception is that there's a potentially informal exclusion, or the children aren't at school on a regular basis. That isn't currently data that EA centrally holds. That is data that would be held at a school level basis. And there's no way of us currently extracting that data to determine whether that is a real issue or it is not a real issue, Deputy Chair. So yes, that is something that we will need to explore in more detail. Alongside that, there's obviously children who, school avoidance, school anxiety. There's lots of reasons out there why children aren't attending. But in terms of that informal piece, that seems to be the issue, that children aren't attending, or that's, for whatever reason they're not there. That isn't being collected. The EA has currently no way, or the department have no way of collecting that data at the moment. So it's an issue we're going to have to explore further before I can actually or EA can give you a definitive position on that.
Deputy Chair, I think on the attendance piece, the lack of data is an issue across the system, not just in relation to special educational needs, possibly something to pick up on another time. Dana, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I suppose trust is going to be really important going forward, because I'm going to be honest, Dale, I see no improvement this year as compared to the year before when I came to being placed at the same time as their peers as children with special needs. Placements in general, transport, now the reduced timetables are starting to come my way as well. It's a continued from the year before. And what it really doesn't help is that when we're about a week out from the school finishing and there was still hundreds not even getting communicated to, I really do thank your staff, to be honest, because the link officers were working quite late on with transport, because not that I was asking them to respond to me at that time, but they responded to me at 9:30, 10:30 at night, which shows how much pressure they're under, and they wanted to get there. The minister was transatlantic. The chief executive of the EA was at Wimbledon. That perception to parents is not good enough, and that trust is just not there. They don't believe anything that's being said anymore, and I think we need to work on that, and that comes to communication. The communication piece is so important. We need to get that right, because it's not happening, and we are acting as that sort of in between. You know, we're hearing the stories, we're trying to get that information as well, but we're probably making it harder as well on the link officers, because they're then responding to me as well. So I think we need to come away from that piece, and that there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. And I really do welcome that open letter and that support. And I suppose I'm preambling here, I'm really sorry, but it does come into now. I'm really glad what I've heard from you so far today. The minister yesterday says, my interpretation of this was he wasn't going to engage in anything until his plan was agreed in principle. That worries me. He also says that schools are going to close with no real detail in that. So I'm going to ask you, do you have any communication that schools are on the verge of being closed, or placements, children won't be placed? Like, is that conversations happening? And if they are, where is this? Is this in Belfast? Is this across the north? What is it?
So I think there's maybe a couple of things there. I suppose, and going back to the original point about communication and things aren't any better. I mean, I know I sat in here, I've been here twice now over the last 4 or 5 months, and was very clear that we thought it was going to be a really difficult position. We said that there would be children that, while technically placed, would be in contingency arrangements because there was going to be not delays, but because of construction, etc., etc. So look, I hope that message was coming through here, that we were saying that.
I don't mean communication to us, to be fair, Adell, you've always came in. I mean that communication to a parent, because I don't know of any cases, particularly in numbers of 80 to 100, where mainstream children are not placed in a setting that isn't ready, or just aren't placed at all at the same time as their peers. That's what I mean. And then that communication, and then in the transport, just wasn't there for parents again this year.
And again, it's back to, I suppose the solution is, we're in this perpetual cycle every year where it is last minute, and so the children get placed, and then in terms of transport, the transport teams get information at the last minute to try and put in place arrangements for the children. They try to do that as quickly as possible, and then what you find is that the parent, maybe a taxi arrives in good faith to take the child to school, but because the child has special needs, actually what you would wanted to do was to have a better lead-in time to allow the taxi driver to get to know the child, or to reach out to get the parents. So it all comes back to this cycle of every year where at the last minute we're really, really struggling to get these placements up and running, to get the capacity in place. 10 link officers can't place the children. If we can't place the children, then the transport teams can't plan, because they don't know if Dale's going to school X or school Y. So it's all down to that cycle.
But you don't believe you can break this cycle?
I absolutely believe that, yeah.
So
in terms of
that's important. That's really important, because that's a positive message from yesterday, to be honest.
In addition to that, the communication will also be easier with the new data systems, where parents can see in real time what's happening with the case.
Yeah.
That frees up time for link officers to respond easy. As of lunchtime today, the link officers had 98 correspondence from MLAs sitting unanswered. Almost all of them are, what's happening with my case. If that's something parent can see in real time on a system, that makes it easier. Not saying it's the only solution, but it's one of many small things that are happening that together can make a big difference. And then if you also then are quicker with the placements, all those things, the cumulative effect of all those things makes a much better way to be able to communicate well with parents. Of course there's trust issues, and we can't fix trust issues overnight. That's just because we say it doesn't mean trust is fixed. We know that. But we're in a place this year to actually look different. If you come back in this image again in 12 months' time, I'd be quite disappointed, because we really should have a different place. It should be in a different place.
Can I just, I suppose, just the bit about the school closures, because I think that's important, because I don't want that to be alarmist in a sense. So, and again, I'll admit I didn't hear the Minister yesterday, but look, I understand the Minister was making an announcement. We've got a plan, because criticism in the past was we don't have a plan for the special school estate. We know that our children, we're over capacity in the special school estate. We need more special schools, so we need those buildings, we need that capital investment.
No, we know, but that doesn't put us in danger of schools closing.
However, I think, and again, I maybe to be corrected, I think what the Minister alluding to was, because I know also part of his statement was around the general pressure on the school estate. The capital investment is being squeezed. All of the money right now is being spent on SEN. But on the flip side of that is we know that our school estate is crumbling. We have a huge backlog. And if we don't have enough capital money to maintain our mainstream schools, then we potentially do run the risk where in certain situations either parts of schools or schools will close because we're not maintaining them. So if, for example, a heating system fails, Danny, and I can't afford to replace it, then that isn't a safe environment for those children to go into. That might be what the Minister was saying.
Will get fixed.
Pardon?
Heating system will get fixed.
We have a budget, a finite budget, and it may not get fixed.
Thought it was important to get an answer to that question. Has gone over time. I won't necessarily do that in every case, but I think there has been some parental concern around that statement that schools would be closing. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks. I would like to move to talk a wee bit more about the LITs and just to understand what particular specialisms that you need or have demand for in your teams right now.
So the LITs consists of eight teams joining into one. And sorry, I have to look at to make sure. I mean, I have the acronyms, but my being new, I get things wrong. So there's language communication, moderate learning difficult service, moderate learning difficulties, Down syndrome service, literacy service, autism advice and information service, behaviour and sport and provision service, post-primary behaviour and sport, and early years intervention service.
Yeah.
Those are coming together into one local impact team to deliver a single service for children with a single point of contact. Instead of having 8 different services in silos with different referral systems, different admin systems, you have one place you go looking at what the child needs, and the child then gets this.
They'll be referred to the right specialist.
Yes.
And you have staff to meet the demand within those specialisms right now.
The impact teams is a combination of the existing stuff. There's not new stuff. There's demand capacity gap. We obviously want to do more, but there's no reduction in staff. They should lead to an improved efficiency because of better provision of children. But I mean, it's not a secret. We need more intervention early on to get better outcomes for children.
So we do need to get additional resource in there to meet the demand. And do you know what that looks like? What the scale of that is?
Yes. So across the teams, geographically, we've had to reorganise the teams. So there's actually some geographical hotspots that just because of particular officers that mightn't be involved, that there's a gap there. But then more generally, just because there has been a general increase in children with SEN requirements, there is an additional resource that's required. As I recall, Michelle, I think it's somewhere in the region of about £2 million in order to staff that additionality.
Okay. What kind of number of staff is that you're trying to hire?
I can't do the maths backwards.
No, but just thought you might know how many people you need in position to meet the demand. I'm really keen to understand, we talk about SEN transformation a lot, and I think that sort of strays into a lot of different areas perhaps. So you've got the transformation work in the EA, but then we know there's transformation projects, maybe in DE, around the specific ring-fence transformation fund. I'd like to get an understanding of just where those are, what is happening in both of those spaces, and do they overlap with each other? It feels like there's a real acute pressure now within the EA to deliver on the ground. Is there money being spent on transformation projects in DE that perhaps isn't contributing right now to the pressures that you're feeling?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, the transformation work across DE and EA, it's one piece of work. It's not different piece of work. There's a number of different projects looking at different things. Some are led by DE and some are led by us. That doesn't mean they're contradictory or competing. A number of projects are testing things, or looking how we can do things differently.
What are those projects?
I would have to provide a list too, because there's 13 projects through the transformation funding specifically, that's managed through the. Probably easier if we provide it in writing to you than go through everything in here. But examples, for example, it includes so local impact teams is one of the main projects. That's a cornerstone. There is work around a support model for specialist schools, special school support hubs for other for mainstream schools around us, that they're not competing. They're supporting.
I'm just trying to understand it. Yeah.
Some of those things are small projects that involves a couple of £100,000. The local impact teams is a major project. It includes 500 staff in total. So there's a wide range of projects. We can set out in detail in writing because the proper answer would take us a bit of time to go through. But I can assure you that it's not competing. We need to know how things work. So some of the things will work, some of the things won't. Therefore, it's right to try a number of different things. And if they don't work, we need to be brave and say, actually, that's not the top priority. But it's really hard to know what will actually work in our area straight away.
It's a fair question to ask. Is it right to put time and resource now into pilots and looking at things that might work when there's immediate pressures and we kind of know to fix those we need to put people into lit teams, we need to get those specialists, and then that there's the unions brought this up last week as well, like there are immediate things that there feels like if we could focus on it would make a huge impact in terms of the outcomes on the kids. And I accept absolutely testing things and making sure that they work is valuable, but is it the right priority right now considering the pressure on the ground?
I mean, I think this is a very good question, because when you firefight the house, you want to stop the fire. Yeah. But if you only firefight and don't also look at how to build the house fireproof in the first place, we will never get out of fire.
If it's already on fire.
Yeah, anyway, but that's probably we need to do both. I mean, we need to do both. I mean, most of these projects are quite small projects that in itself will not, if we took that funding away, would not make a huge impact to the rest of the work, because individually they're quite small projects. Mm-hmm. But if they work, they can help us with models how to fix the system properly going forward long term.
Just asking to draw a line at that point, just in terms of time. But I think that is, one of the challenges we have in this space is that we're not clear how much all of the elements of the SEND delivery agenda actually cost. We just have one headline figure, and I think that would really help, I think, the committee to understand the priorities, but that probably sits with the department more than with the EA, I think, in this case. Okay, John, you had indicated next.
Yeah, I'll try and make this brief. First of all, I can thank all your staff for the hard work they've done. Because I know myself, I've heard they've been working night and day, particularly towards the end of school, so I genuinely appreciate it. A couple of questions. I'll try and make this brief. I don't know if you heard Ema Cubitt's testimony.
No.
She did confirm that she believed, when I was asking her, that unimpeded inspection, protected inspection from industrial action was actually critical to safeguarding children with SEN. From bullying and making sure that their safeguarding is high. So I just think it's really important. I want to get that on the public record. I asked Emma, was there any acceptable language guide for parents, teachers, ourselves in relation to addressing when we're using language about SEN? Because she commented on some of the language we use in the assembly. She says, well, that's actually outdated language. Is there a guide? She was going to develop one, if not. But are you aware of a guide?
I'm not aware of a guide. We know that some of that moves and changes, and we need to be clearly sensitive in terms of how we articulate some of that. But I don't believe EA holds a guide specifically. I think it would be helpful. Yes, I think it would, absolutely. Yeah.
Because as I ask questions, sometimes I'm minded even about race. There's phrases we used to use old days that you wouldn't use now, coloured, black, so I actually think language is important. That's the second thing.
Can I just note, it might be quite helpful if Emma this Autism develops that kind of guide rather than us. So I just find it would be really helpful if that came from an internal. Sorry, it'd be really helpful if an external person such as Emma developed that guide rather than the authority.
She suggested that is something she'd like to do, but
really
I think there were resource limitations.
Excellent. There's two other key points I have. Safety of children is paramount. I've just got a question back through the Education Minister that the longest journey to school, return journey, is 106 miles. You'd agree that's not acceptable?
Absolutely.
It takes 2 hours 40 minutes, which is clearly unacceptable. Sorry, that's a leading question. You would accept it's unacceptable. Yeah. And that's not a criticism. I'm just trying to get that out in the record. Now, apart from addressing that, I have one particular issue I'm very interested in, and that is a lot of those children go to school via taxis.
Yes.
What system of vetting is in place in addition to what the Department of Communities has in place for ensuring the taxi drivers are safe to have unsupervised access to children? Is there additional checks or not?
So yes is the simple answer to that, and in fact taxis are probably within the education sector the most scrutinised in terms of access checks. So for example, every year There's a child protection policy. I can't remember the number, 2013 or something, John. I can't remember the number, but within that inherently it says that where we have private contractors, taxi drivers, that they're subject to access NI checks every single year. Unlike for example, a teacher who's only subject to one check at the start of their career.
Yeah.
So yes, there's increased checks there. In terms of that additionality then, as part of their licensing arrangements to become a taxi driver through the Department of Infrastructure, there's a check at that point there.
Let me just, because this is where I'm coming to, because I think we have a massive flaw here that nobody's gripped in Northern Ireland. Bran Stelford was convicted last 18 months ago. He had 66 previous convictions. And there are taxi drivers all over Northern Ireland who have multiple convictions: firearms offences, terrorism offences, burglary, domestic violence. Now, unless there's a specific check, because Access NI are waving those through, Bran Stelford, 66 previous convictions, he is deemed by the Department of Infrastructure to be a safe person, to have unsupervised access to people. Now, is it the case that we could have people in Northern Ireland who are taxi drivers with multiple convictions like Bran Stelford who could be taking our children to school? And would anything have stopped Bran Stelford being someone who would have taken children to school on a 3-hour unsupervised journey?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways. I think actually maybe because I'm conscious of committee time, it's maybe something we can pick up. There's lots of detail around that. I want to give you the assurances. So when it comes to our own Access NI clearance, we get full Access NI. We have our own procedure and protocol around previous convictions. So we look at the recency, the nature of the conviction, and there's a criteria around that, around which we, the EA, apply to determine whether that person is a suitable person to transport a child. So, for example, one could have had a conviction 30 years ago and have had a completely clear record ever since. So, in terms of recency, also the nature of the offence. So, if somebody's had something quite extreme, Class A drugs or some of the more serious offences, then clearly they're not going to be approved to be a taxi driver. So I suppose what I'm saying is there is a process in place.
Two different things.
I'll
Approved
just
to be a
ask
taxi driver.
So John, just through the chair. John.
Yeah,
Very, very short on time. Final couple of points on this. We will have the opportunity for a full evidence session on transport, but we are just running over on time.
This is not the Education Authority, by the way. I think it's a systemic underlying issue that so many people who have very serious convictions are deemed by the Department of Infrastructure to be a fit and reasonable person to have unsupervised access to vulnerable people. And I'm specifically seeing if there's a safety valve in that in terms of children with special education needs. And that's where I'm trying to get to, because I think we've got a real risk here, unless there is very robust, and I'd be interested to know of how many taxi drivers who apply for this, how many of them actually get turned down.
I mean, I think it's an important issue because if the public's watching this, I don't want to be alarmist to the public about the people that are operating taxis in Northern Ireland. There absolutely are taxi drivers that are turned down every year, and I don't want to. Completely safeguarding is hugely important, and I do not want to play it down. But I also equally need to make the case that many of our taxi drivers are really good individuals. 100%. They really care about the children. So I want to just provide that balance. But I think that probably is something that needs to be discussed in more detail rather than a quick 5 minutes.
So you can pick it up if there's written correspondence you want the committee to look to, or if we pick it up at a further evidence session. And I'm happy for a final comment and then we move on, because I've given you substantially.
I rely on taxis myself, okay, because I like a pint of Guinness. So I rely on taxis to do a vital role. They're public servants in many ways. It's not a dig at 99% of taxi drivers.
But I also want to provide assurance to parents out there that this is not a wide-scale issue that they should be unduly concerned about.
Well, I am concerned because Bran Stelford would have driven around vulnerable females and things, and there's dozens of Bran Stelfords. But I mean, I just want to make the point. It's something
I think we really are. We can pick it up on actions at the end of the session. Peter, I'm going to bring you in next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure you want to start with easy or hard. Let's start with easy. Would you agree with Emma, the autism reviewer who just came in, and the Education Minister, that there is an opportune window between now and year end to set a strategic direction in terms of SEND reform?
Yes.
Okay. What would you see as any key hurdles to that strategic direction being operationalised?
Twofold. First is, as we talked about, trust. There's lack of trust. If you don't have trust, if you don't have buy-in from parents and schools, it's impossible to change. We must show that this is better for children It's not about money saving. It's not about anything else. It's about getting better outcomes for children with special educational needs. The second aspect is the funding available. The demand has increased hugely. That is putting pressures on everyone's budgets. It is difficult to reform and provide better outcomes in a very difficult financial climate.
Okay.
Can I add one thing to that?
As long as it's quick, Dale, I've only got 3 minutes.
I know, but
I'm only joking.
I think the other important thing is that trust thing needs to extend to also, the support from you as well as politicians, and to trust us as the practitioners to know exactly what it is that's needed to transform. The local impact teams has been a great example of where consistently over the last 24 months when I've been involved in that, consistently we've been challenged on whether this is the right thing to do. So on one hand, we've been asked to transform. On the other hand, we've worked really hard, the teams have worked really hard to base it on evidence. So there's something also about trusting the EA and those people who are expert in those fields to know what it is they're doing to transform the system.
Okay. On the funding, again, just a wee tiny answer. Is it capital? Is it resource? Or is it both? Thomas?
Reform of SEN is mostly resource.
Mostly resource. Okay. Dale, I'm going to pick up on that local impact team, which is still called local impact teams. The unions were in here and they were saying, they were maybe characterized, there were some teething problems. Okay, that's how they characterize it. Certainly the conversations I've had with EA staff and how this is working, my assessment is there are a few teething problems as well. Would you agree with that assessment? And is it your view that you're going to get those ironed out? I don't want to go into the details of them all, but would you accept the characterization that there are some teething problems? And if so, are you in a position to resolve those going forward?
Absolutely. The teething problems is a major reform in how we deliver services. It would be remarkable. I think it would be, no one would believe me if I said it was no teething problems, because it will absolutely be. It's 500 staff completely reorganised on how to deliver service. That will cause challenges. Okay. We're addressing those challenges on as they come up on a daily basis. There are meetings with the senior teams every week about this, and they are progressing.
Okay, fine. Final question. Say I'm doing well. Is back to link officers, and I'm not sure who raised it first, but I wanted to just come back to that. So the first question is just for my information. What sort of salary band is a link officer? Ballpark?
They're probably, I'm going to say £35,000 a year.
That was about my understanding of it as well. That was what I was going to guess at there, Dale. In terms of, they are crucial. I think it was Danny actually maybe raised it. They really are crucial, and I've dealt with them obviously in my context as an MLA as well. But you could see how they are under extraordinary pressure. They're having really difficult conversations. They are definitely susceptible to sickness and burnout and a whole range of things. So I suppose my question really is, in terms of how we go forward, given the fact that these individuals are so core to a lot of the stuff that's happening at the moment and so important, has there been any thinking in EA in terms of how they can be better supported? If you're struggling to get them, is there a question around salary banding? I'm not sure if that's the case, but also when they are there, has EA particularly considered what it might do to support these individuals and help them, just given the nature of the job that they have?
I think there's two parts that I'm not sure. Well,
response still on this one.
Well, so two things. I think it's firstly the key thing is back to the core question. If we can address the issue of having capacity in the system, so if we can get schools to say yes, we need schools to say yes, we need those schools to step up to the plate, then the outworkings of that are that fundamentally the job becomes a much more manageable job. And I think if we can resolve that piece and we can get over that hump, then I think the job of a link officer becomes a very, very different job, Peter.
It's actually solving, it's actually, the job changes if the solution is in place nearly and has opened up a little.
And I think it's really important internally, the transformation of SEN is also how we can make link officer job better and easier inside EA. Yeah. So that's something we're looking at. The data digitization is a good step on that because it makes their life
I just think
easier.
Sorry, Thomas, I was kind of cross you.
No,
No, you're okay. I was about to agree with you. I think it's key. I think it's important, and it's really good that you both recognise that, and there's some of that solution will be driven by the environmental changes, but also it's just the job itself. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. David, you were next.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I sort of just want to build on a point that came out of one of Peter's questions there, and that was your answer. You said reform of sentence mostly focused on in terms of resource, and that's where the requirement is. The Minister was making the point in the Chamber mostly around capital, and the investment that's needed there in order to meet need. So in terms of also Dale's point about boilers and things, sometimes there's false economy, and actually continue to invest in old schools is not the best way forward in that regard. And I felt, and I'm not trying to make too political point, I feel that there is a bit of political pushback from Sinn Féin perspective in terms of trying to say that if only the Minister would be more careful with his budget, if only he would move things around a little bit, that actually he could solve these problems within the budget that he has. And I recognise that's not just, there's sometimes that it's not just the slice of the pie, it's actually that the pie itself is not big enough at the moment, and I understand that, so it's not too political a point in that regard. But can we be absolutely clear that we cannot achieve the outcome aspirations that we have for our SEND children without the additional executive investment outside the current funding model, and that is needed, particularly in terms of capital investment in the state?
I mean, I'll take the state piece. I mean, we've been very clear what's required in terms of additional special school places. Everybody has agreed to it over the last 3 or 4 years. I assume that was everybody agreed and accepted that we needed more spaces. And likewise, alongside that, we do have a huge backlog across all of our schools. And all of our schools are in all of our communities, and I'm now responsible for that piece now again back in my new role of Chief Operating Officer. We really are under pressure in terms of the budget for maintaining and improving the school estate. So in both regards, we absolutely need capital investment.
It can't be done within the current. It
cannot be done with. We can do little things. Yeah. We can do it really, really slowly. But if people want some of these issues resolved quickly,
absolutely, then
we need to find a way to invest.
Yeah. Sorry.
And maybe I was too quick in answering the question in the interest of time, that SEND transformation is people, but that has to be delivered in a school setting that is up to date.
It's fit for purpose.
Yeah. So they go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Even though they're slightly different areas.
Yeah. So essentially, what I'm hearing is that while people, and we all deal with SEND issues in our offices day and daily, and particularly through the summer, but if the executive wants to see those things resolved and see them moving more smoothly in future, it needs to not just speak about it as a priority, but the executive needs to put its money where its mouth is. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Just not used to you getting in well under time. You caught me off guard there. Kathy, you'd indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair. Caught me off guard, David there. Thanks, guys, for your evidence here today. I just want to raise something that's been mentioned there, Thomas. I think you said the strapline about the lack of trust. So when children are moving from P3 to P4, very often they stay in school for that longer hour between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. I have a principal in a Senko at the minute who have a number of children in a class who require one-to-one at all times. It says that in their statement. They're currently begging the EA to give them that 1 extra hour of classroom assistant time for those children. Another principal's battling with the EA to get a very, very small set of steps replaced by a disability ramp. Other principals have heard the department sit in the exact same seats that you guys are sitting in now, saying that the removal of the educational psychologist has helped and relieved the workload of our Senkos in our schools. How on earth do you expect schools to trust the EA and what they're saying that they will get the support to set up these SPIMs?
Kathy, I mean, the 3 areas there in terms of the one-to-one piece, obviously schools have the right to come forward as part of the annual review and seek to increase those hours. And our teams will look at that and make a judgment about whether that additionality is required. In many cases, that additionality may be approved, but in other situations they look at the needs of the child and they determine that perhaps it may not be needed. Again, it's one of those things. If you want to give us the individual detail in that, we can do that. We have talked before about the classroom assistant model. There's been many reports in saying which has said that the classroom assistant model is not necessarily the most effective. Hence, why we need to move into a different type of model. So look,
sorry, I'm sorry to cut across you because I'm not really looking for the specifics on each of those instances. What I'm trying to give you is a feel for maybe those principals who are out there and maybe are thinking about taking on these specialist provisions. How can they trust? How can you give them the reassurance that they are going to get the support that they need when in all of these different areas they're fighting these battles?
Well, look, I can only answer that by saying, in a sense, you've brought together and aggregated some issues there across a number of schools and said, how can principals trust the EA? Of course, the EA still has to do its business and make sure there's a level of rigour around what it does in terms of the money the expenditure, and if it's going to be additionality. So what I would say to you, Cathy, is we have invested a huge amount of money in supporting the SPIMs. None of that money comes out of the school budget. All of that is being carried centrally by the Education Authority. We have invested in teams, our specialist support teams, to support the schools that set up specialist provisions. We have said, and we've openly acknowledged, and I have to say it, do we get it wrong sometimes? Yes, I'm sure we have got it wrong sometimes in the past, and we will continue to get it wrong sometimes in the future. But that doesn't mean because we get it wrong sometimes that means that everybody else, including our school leaders, can say that gives them the opportunity to veto putting in a specialist provision. So look, what I would reiterate today is we're up for the challenge. We will meet with principals, we will engage with principals. If there's more support required, we will look to see how we can provide that additional support. We will absolutely step up to that challenge. Of course, that will require additional resource. So again, if additional resource can be provided, we're happy to pass that resource on to schools to support them. This is not about trying to be them and us with schools. However, there may well be occasions where EA does disagree with the assessment of a school principal on a particular individual child, and those will continue throughout this process and throughout this exercise of trying to get a point where we stabilise capacity.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Cathy. Okay, that takes us to the end of the session. I just wanted to ask one very final point just before you go, and it's looking back to very much. I think everybody seems to be approaching this. Let's learn from what's gone before. Let's have a reset, and all of that is welcome. Just looking back to the previous year, and you've set out a sort of timeline of what you need this year. At what point do you think if you're not by Halloween at the point you need to be, and the crisis picture is emerging again? Is that the point when you need to put the red flag up to the department to say we need some sort of other intervention here? Because right now everybody seems to be on the same page. We're heading in the same direction. If we're not there at Halloween and you're saying that's really the critical juncture, what's the intervention at that stage? And would I just to give a very brief answer, but I think we need a sense as a committee for tracking this in terms of when we need to be looking to hear on this again.
I think it's reasonable to say that we need to call this much earlier in the year. So I think certainly before Christmas, if we don't see a huge difference in terms of the number of schools that have been able to say yes, then I think we can probably be more confident to say that it is likely, based on the previous years, that we're likely to have a similar outcome in September, and we won't shy away from calling that out as early as possible.
Let's hope that's not where we land. I think it's important to get that time scale, because I think last year there was just the sense, it all just took too long, and again, we were in June before we really had any substantive intervention from the Minister, and that, it's just too late. So I think early red flag, and I think, to keep the committee cited on that as well. So, look, thank you very much for your time and comprehensive evidence there. Thank you. Okay, so obviously all of that will feed into our inquiry evidence, and it's good we've had Hansard here to record all of that, but I think there may be a couple of things that may be worth picking up at this stage. I think there's probably some early information that if we can get through would be helpful. I'm wondering whether some of the stuff around precisely just where the gaps are and the numbers in the local impact teams and any resource gap there would be helpful to have. I've already highlighted I think we really do need to be pressing the department on a breakdown of the costs of the SEND delivery plan. We really do need that, and I'm going to suggest the EA budget detail on SEND of just current budget and how that is broken down. Happy to hear from other members if there's anything else that they think we need to be seeking at this stage. No, agreed at this stage. Okay.
A point of information, Chair. I mean, David has raised the issue of Sinn Féin saying the EA or the department shouldn't get any more money. We have never said that, ever at any time. What we've said is that in the past, the EA and the department have not been able to show or demonstrate value for money. And when they do that, then, they'll have passed the test where if they ask for more money, then it can be given. There's no difficulty with that.
Okay.
We're certainly not opposed in principle to them getting more money.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So that takes us on then to item 9, unless Clerk, there's anything you wanted to bring in at this stage?
There are a couple of things that the witnesses didn't answer that you might want to follow up on. For instance, you could get more precise details on the vacancy and sickness rates among the SEND officers and the overall figure for SEND delivery cost. And the autism reviewer also thought that you should speak to I've lost the bit where I wrote that down. She wanted you to consult with someone.
I'm really tempted to fill in what the blank
What
might
is it,
be
Mike?
here,
What is it? Do you know what
Irving,
it
with a
is?
comedy answer, but
Right, okay.
no, I don't know the answer.
If you locate it, I mean,
Yeah.
The Middletown School.
Middletown
Yes.
School, I think
Again,
it was.
I
Yeah.
beg your pardon. Thank you, Mark.
And clarity on, because I was unclear, the safeguarding and vetting policy that the EA has for taxi drivers over and above what the Department of Infrastructure has.
I mean, my understanding is that it is considerably more robust than that licensing regime. There could be issues for the Department of Infrastructure there, but I think it's given that that's been aired today, I think it's important we need to get some clarity back on that. And David?
Also, just on the point of the this language guide that we've been talking about. I mean, it's not a mode that I tend to prefer. I think I prefer sort of good grace and us understanding we all try to be respectful in our tone, and if something causes offence, then we'll take that into account and so on. But if we're going to have a formal style guide in that regards, I do think that it's something that should be consulted on more widely than just the reviewer. Not to take away from the reviewer, but
Could I come in on this, because I think it's, I mean, I didn't want to muddy the waters during the meeting, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's a year 1 action of the delivery plan, and I'm going to have to use a word here that I'm not confident on the pronunciation, but a definitive nomenclature, I believe is the word, in relation to SEN, and the department has undertaken that as a year 1 action. Pretty sure we're about halfway through year 2, and I haven't seen that coming through. So I actually think there's space to ask the department about this. They've committed to
fair enough, and
deliver
I
it.
actually think that's a more appropriate place for it to sit, to be honest.
So I think we ask that.
Can I just say, and it's not in any way about political correctness
No, I understand.
or being punitive if someone makes a mistake in language.
Being
It's actually just about education. And as long as the good intent is there, I wouldn't have anyone
No,
criminalised.
I knew that was the case.
Quite the opposite.
Yes,
It's actually just to say there's some words that you use or don't use.
Yeah, no, I do understand.
I don't think anybody should I don't know,
Common
there should be
sense.
Any
Common
division,
sense.
any division,
agree,
any
agree.
division
Very
around
common these
Things
days.
change. There's words that
respectful
come to do that
use
weren't.
of language. Absolutely. Okay, look, there's plenty there, and I think Michelle raised this earlier. I think just through the clerk, would it be possible to have a folder then for members that tracks correspondence that goes through the inquiry, so that we know that we're what is actually being issued, so that we have sight of that, because I think that's sometimes we ask for a lot and we sometimes lose the tracking on it. Okay. Correspondence then, so members will be relieved to know we have considerably less correspondence to deal with than we did last week. So in your packs it's pages 57 to 66, and as usual there's a summary note there, and that's at page 57. I'll just raise a couple of items that may need committee consideration or decision. Item 9.2 on page 58 is correspondence from the Mental Health Champion, seeking a meeting with the committee to discuss the issues affecting mental health in schools, and in particular in relation to the emotional health and wellbeing framework. Again, we are under pressure in terms of time, but that's an evidence session I'd be keen to have, but obviously when capacity allows. but my understanding is there may actually be space. We may have an evidence slot free that works next week for both the Mental Health Champion and Committee. So if members are agreed, I'm happy to put that invite out if we're in agreement.
Right.
Item 9.3, page 59, is correspondence from the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman, and I think this correspondence went to all members, setting out concerns that Clause 7 of the School Uniforms Bill, in their view, has the potential to undermine the work of NIPSO, and I think it is around really potentially, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but muddying the waters, maybe around just what the processes are around complaints handling in this space, and that they all sit around Clause 7 in the bill, which received substantial debate in the Chamber earlier in the week. And I believe the Commissioner has also then provided a copy of that letter that she sent to the Education Minister. So I think just to emphasise, the committee really did that run out of time in that regard. The NIPSO correspondence came in right at the end of our process, and we are now in a stage where for further consideration stage time is also similarly tight, but I do think that NIPSO are a really critical part of our public sector makeup in terms of complaints handling, and I do think it's appropriate to give them their space. So I would like to propose we do write an urgent letter to the department and seek clarity if they have indeed carried out a full assessment when drafting this legislation around the impact on NIPSO, and if there's maybe possibility at further consideration stage. I mean, if members consider it appropriate to ask if the Minister could speak to that on the floor of the Assembly, so we can have on the public record just the department's understanding of where NIPSO sit in this process. There was a lot of discussion around what's on the public record around a debate, and the intentions around legislation is very important. So that would be something I think may be appropriate if members are agreed. Agreed. Item 9.6 on page 66 is correspondence from the independent review of baseline school funding, providing the terms of reference for the review, details of the panel, and seeking the committee's views. I have to admit, this is not something I think that has really landed at committee in any great detail, but does seem to be a positive intervention, because this seems to be a step beyond just the common funding formula. It's really around what are the school's needs before you start applying that. And is the system able to meet the basic needs of schools before you even begin to differentiate on any other needs? I would want to suggest that we can write back to say that we're very happy to engage with the work of that review panel, and I'm certainly content with those terms of reference, unless any members have any other views. No. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 57? Okay, move on to forward work programme. So I just would refer members to page 41 of tabled papers, where the plan is there for you. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. I think it's going to be a very busy time between now and Christmas. There's lots of things the department want to brief us on, and there's lots of things the committee remain interested in, and the SEN inquiry. I wanted to highlight in particular, you'll note there's a couple of things there where EA briefings are listed. I want to just sort of assuage any panic. We're not suggesting they come in and brief us on all those things at each session. Those are the suggested sort of areas we're likely to be hearing from the EA, but it depends on availability of officials. But we will be getting briefings in from the EA on some of those very specific operational themes, and already we were starting to stray into them today. There's clearly a lot of appetite to get into that detail, so it's just a note. And then really, other than endorsing the work plan as it sits, I am just conscious we're on the 17th of September and the Minister is due on the 22nd of October, and I think the department were keen to get a sense of what the committee were seeking to raise with the Minister. Now, obviously, we can't restrain ourselves, can curtail ourselves too much in that regard, but I mean, I'm going to happily put out there that I think, given our inquiry, that I would be quite content for the focus of that evidence session to be special educational needs, unless anyone has any other issues they're particularly keen to have on the table at that session. I'm not suggesting that would be the only one. Happy to hear other suggestions. My proposal would be that special educational needs, so wide-ranging, should appropriately be the focus, but happy to open up to others. Deputy Chair, do you have any views?
Oh, I'm happy enough with that. We can raise other issues, I suppose, but certainly SEN should have priority.
Any members, any other views? Content?
Content.
Okay. I think if there's a substantial change in that feeling and there is a burning issue that members are wanting to explore in detail with the Minister, I mean,
flag it up.
I think it's appropriate to flag that. Just so that there's no accusation of trying to catch anybody out. We're all happy to be open and transparent in what we're doing here. So, other than that, are members content to agree the forward work programme as drafted?
I just wanted to tell you that since that version went out to you, just the department have come back about a couple of additional sessions, so you will see them being factored in. The legislation on 16 to 18. Legislation on GTC, 2 sessions for on the 12th of November. So you would have a joint oral evidence session on capital and resource budget and October monitoring, and then a second session which would be entirely about Stool.
That's fine. Also, if I could just add, I think it would be good at this stage to get early date confirmed. I mean, it may be into late November, December, but on the department's evidence on the inquiry, because I wouldn't want to reach the point where we're struggling to get the department in. I think once we've heard our evidence, I think we really do need to have the department in to speak to some of that in detail. So.
Yes.
Okay. I think there's agreement to move on to the next item, which is 11. Any other business? Don't have any indications for any, so we'll move on to date and time and place of next meeting, and that is scheduled for Wednesday the 24th of September, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And I'll just put the question then that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.